Chapter 11-12. Joe sat cross-legged on the ground and stared blankly at the 7 crooked bars beside his feet. They were the marks of the number of days. Every day that passed, he would dig a line in the ground with his fingers. Today was the 7th day. He did not dare to think about whether Farina was still alive, or whether Lorenzo was still torturing her. Whenever he thought about it, he would feel a stabbing pain in his heart. Joe began to wonder if he had made the wrong choice. Although Sean had agreed to his request and had not been mistreated, Grey Castle was too far away from the kingdom of Wolfheart. It would take at least a month for the king of Grey Castle to make a decision and send troops to the kingdom of Wolfheart. It would take even longer if he had to discuss, consider, and prioritize other matters. He was not confident that Roland Wimbledon would deal with the internal strife of the church like he dealt with domestic politics. It was even possible that Roland would refuse. In that case, all his efforts would be in vain. Joe lowered his eyes and looked at the chain around his ankle. It connected him to the foot of the bed, and was about the length of a man. Perhaps he could use this chain to... Hey, are you awake? The tent flap was suddenly lifted and the dazzling light shone in, causing Joe to squint. You're still awake. In that case, come with us. Go, where? The sudden light seemed to interrupt his train of thought. His mind was as blank as the ground. To the kingdom of Wolfheart, of course. Aren't you in a hurry to save your lover? Joe's eyes gradually adjusted to the sunlight. It was Sean who was standing in front of him. Then a key was thrown to him. Joe finally realized the meaning of Sean's words. He grabbed the key with trembling hands and said, Is it? His Majesty has approved the rescue plan and decided to take you back to Neverwinter for trial, Sean said calmly. The team in charge of this operation has arrived at Coral Bay. After meeting up with them, we can head directly to Archduke Island. Already? Arrived? How could it be so fast? Joe could not believe his ears. But now was not the time to think about this. Joe opened the lock in a flurry. He staggered as he stood up, but he managed to stand up straight. If you feel unwell. No, please take me there. He pleaded eagerly. The corners of Shaowen's mouth curled up slightly. Then come. Charles looked back at the mark on the ground. The twisted horizontal bar was imprinted with a silver edge by the sunlight, as if it was shining brightly. He didn't know what kind of future awaited him. But he finally saw a glimmer of hope. Charles took a deep breath and followed the guard out of the tent. 1 day later. Coral Bay. This was the easternmost port in the Kingdom of Dawn. Compared to the ports closer to Grey Castle and the fjords, this port was undoubtedly much more deserted. Ever since the church had swept through the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, the situation had worsened. The royal family had fallen, and the nobles were fighting for power. Even now, the 2 kingdoms were still in chaos, and the trade had declined significantly. Most of the ships docked at the pier were flying the flags of the Chamber of Commerce of the fjords, while ships from the 2 northern kingdoms were rarely seen. Among these sparse ships, there was one that was rather eye-catching. It had no sail, and black smoke was rising from the top of its head. Large wooden wheels were hanging on both sides, and the hull seemed to be made of stone. The legendary stone ship of Grey Castle. Joe thought. Although he had long heard of its existence, it was the first time he saw it with his own eyes. As soon as they boarded the deck, 2 people immediately came to greet them. It was a man and a woman. Joe's eyes quickly swept over the 2 people, and his heart sank slightly. For some reason, he vaguely felt that the woman was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. Ah, it's Lady Zoe and Lady Betty, Shaowen greeted them warmly. Did His Majesty entrust this mission to you? Because we happened to be in Neverwinter at that time, and we've been to the Kingdom of Dawn before. The woman shrugged. If it wasn't for His Majesty, I really wouldn't want to come so far away. The front line is already fighting with the demons, so I should stay there. By the way, instead of calling you lady, I'd rather you call me Mississippi, the man grinned. Unlike Zoe, I'm one of the last ones to wake up. It's only been 100 years since then. 100 years isn't old enough? The woman glanced at him. But it's strange. In the dream world, those people all fought to call me Mississippi. Of course, it's not impossible for Her Majesty. Then call me Mississippi. Shaowen looked a little helpless. If you think it's better this way, Wait. What are they talking about? Joe looked at him blankly. Lady? Miss? No matter how he looked at it, this person was a man. And what did it mean that they had already fought with the demons? The bloody moon did not appear, so what was the demon they were talking about? Is this the last priest of the church? The woman called Zoe looked at him up and down. The hope of the Queen of Starfall City was turned into a tool for stupid people to fight for power. Although we used to be enemies, I still feel sorry for her. So, it's a kind of reincarnation for us to end all this. The other man nodded. Since everyone is here, let's go. Everyone is here. Joe did not pay attention to the inexplicable words, and quickly looked around. This stone ship was not big enough to accommodate an army, but there were no other ships of Grey Castle around. Your Excellency. Joe gritted his teeth and asked. The one who answered him was Zoe. The rescue team you mentioned is here. Here. As if to verify his guess, the woman pointed at herself and then at Betty. She and I are the whole team. Joe looked at Shawan in horror. Your Excellency. Lorenzo has a God's punishment army. 5 people, no more than 10 at most, right? Sean interrupted him. Joe stared at him blankly and could not even answer with a yes. Why? Why do the 3 of them look so relaxed? That's a monster with an extraordinary body. Ignorance leads to fearlessness. How is that possible? Joe was not sure about the others, but Grey Castle had fought with the God's Punishment Army in Coldwind Ridge, so they should know this kind of terrifying warrior only better than the church. Even if they had powerful firearms, attacking the castle would weaken their advantage in shooting range. Once they entered a narrow area and encountered Scourge, it would be difficult for them to kill him instantly. After all, they were not afraid of pain and would not stop killing until they could not move. According to his plan, at least 1 to 200 people should enter the castle separately and kill the enemies one by one. Only then could they take down the castle at a low cost. If the number of people was lower than that, the casualties would increase significantly. But 2 people? How was that possible? Chapter 11-13. More than enough. Translator. Transin editor. Transin facing such an exaggerated statement, Joe should have laughed or tried to persuade him. However, he was rendered speechless by Krone's confident look. What was even more incredible was that he was going to be involved in this operation. He was asked to cooperate fully and tell everything he knew, which was not out of Joe's expectation. Since the King of Grey Castle had promised to rescue Farina, he must have a detailed understanding of the situation on Archduke Island. They had been lurking on the island for half a year, so they were naturally the most familiar with the situation. Of course, Krone might also interrogate him about other things, which Joe planned to tell him at the same time. Farina's life was more important than the secrets of the church and the sacred texts of the gods. He was willing to tell them everything he knew. However, when he entered the cabin, Joe found that he knew nothing about Roland Wimbledon, his old rival who had fought against the church for many years and finally destroyed the holy city of Hermes. It was neither an intelligence interrogation, nor a war meeting. Sitting at the end of the long table was Cajun Fells, the master dramatist from Grey Castle. Just answer whatever he asks, Sean said and left the cabin. After saying this, Sean left the cabin, leaving behind a stupefied Charles, who stared blankly at Sean. When he was still in the new holy city, he had watched Cajun's troupe on tour. Although it had been almost 10 years, he could still remember that the old man in front of him was Cajun. What was the King of Grey Castle thinking? What came with the ship was not the army, but the famous drama troupe. Did this team really come to save people? Have a seat, my boy. Cajun nodded at him. Would you like some tea or wine? Tea would be fine. A beautiful woman quickly brought him a cup of hot tea. This is my student, Miss Rentgen. Ah, thank you, Joe replied in a daze. If it were not for the shackles on his wrists and ankles, he would have thought that he was in a dream. Why are you here? Because of an agreement with His Majesty, Cajun said with a smile. Cajun smiled. We should have talked in a more comfortable environment, but they wouldn't agree to take off your handcuffs. No, that's fine, he murmured. What do you want to ask me? It's about Farina's story and your story. Charles looked at him in disbelief. Are you referring to the matter between me and her? That's right. When did you join the church? How did you meet her? How did she fall into Lorenzo's hands? I want to know everything, Cajun said slowly. Farina. At the mention of this name, the pain surged. He had been trying his best not to think about her, but the memories were like a tide. Once they started, it was difficult to stop. As soon as he opened his mouth, the words were choked in his throat, and his vision became blurry. Farina was just an ordinary civilian girl when she first joined the church. Her loose, coarse robe was covered with dirty patches. Her hands and feet were swollen from the cold and looked like frozen carrots. On the way to the Hermes Plateau, she would have died if she had not met the carriage he had hired. He was a poor noble who had nothing but his surname. He joined the church just to try his luck. The Holy City did not care about one's background, and they would not reject any convert. Since he could read, he was assigned to the department of clergy and became a scribe. Farina, on the other hand, became a trainee warrior. That made Charles very unhappy. Clergy and warriors were equal organizations in the Holy City. In other words, a commoner girl had become a person of equal status to him. Moreover, he had saved her by accident. In his eyes, Farina should be a cook, a washerwoman, or some other kind of servant. What annoyed him even more was that after recuperating for a period of time, he actually grew quite well. Therefore, the reason why she was chosen as a warrior was very suspicious. He should have been the one to enjoy it. Taking advantage of his position, he often bullied Farina, and even humiliated her in front of her. Farina did not talk back, which encouraged his arrogance. But in the next few years, this young woman gradually revealed her own talent, like a gem that was gradually being carved into shape. Farina was soon promoted from a trainee warrior to a reserve of the Judgment Army, and then to the official Judgment Army captain. During the months of demons, Charles could always see her figure on the wall of the stronghold. But he had just been promoted from a scribe to a clergy assistant. She was already superior to him. He used to pay close attention to Farina's every move, for fear that she would retaliate against him. However, the latter had never taken any action, and his attention had turned into a habit. Charles gradually found that she was not as ordinary as he thought. Then Prince Roland of Grey Castle came. The Pope died, the God's Punishment Army was destroyed, and the cathedral collapsed. The huge church of Hermes seemed to fall apart overnight. Countless believers fled the Holy City that night. Farina was ordered to support the crumbling Judgment Army. She also pulled him out of the crowd during the civil strife. If it were not for that hand, he would have been trampled into meat paste by the refugees. At that moment, he seemed to understand something. After the defeat in Coldwind Ridge, Farina was not the highest person in the church. There were still the officiant, the presiding judge, and the senior commander in the Holy City. The reason why the responsibility of defending the Holy City was handed over to her was not so much because they valued her, but because they wanted to shirk and abandon her. The same was true when Tucker Thor was elected as the acting pope. Everyone knew that it was impossible to defend the Holy City, but no one was willing to take the blame. At the same time, they needed someone to temporarily stabilize the situation in the Holy City, so as to buy time for their escape. Therefore, the miracle of a woman in her 20s becoming the supreme commander of the Judgment Army appeared in Hermes. Ironically, she tried her best to restore the order in the old and new holy cities, but the number of senior officers who stayed was getting fewer and fewer. It was not uncommon for people to leave and leave at night. When the months of demons ended, there were only about 500 judgment warriors left in the Holy City. She was thrown to Roland Wimbledon by those people, as a sacrifice to buy time. Did Farina know nothing about it? No, she knew the meaning of this responsibility from the beginning. But she still stood up without hesitation and spared no effort to do her best. Just because the church accepted her and trained her until now. Just like she never retaliated against him, not even scolded him. Just because he gave her a lift. Seeing Farina drenched in sweat running back and forth, standing on top of the city wall and shouting loudly, Charles felt something touched in his heart. Her small figure swaying under the white snow was so eye-catching. The sweat dripping from the tip of her nose was more dazzling than a gem. For Charles, the church was just an opportunistic place. He should have left long ago, But he chose to stay. It had nothing to do with God. He made a vow to Farina in his heart, swearing allegiance. It was not the loyalty of the believers to the commander of the Judgment Army. It was the loyalty of the knight to follow the guardian. Chapter 11:14. 2 days later. Joe was taken out of his room and stepped onto the bow deck. "Is that Earl Lorenzo's territory?" Sean asked. In the morning sun, the seawall glowed with golden light, and a vague gray and white shadow floated above it. Joe's heart tightened. He could not help but grasp the railing tightly and lean forward, fearing that he would miss any detail. Yes, that's the Archduke Island. He finally came back with the rescuer. "Farina, please hold on a little longer." There are 2 docks on the island, facing east and west respectively. Joe took a deep breath and said impatiently, "Ever since Lorenzo became a noble, the docks have been guarded by guards. But mainly to guard against other nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart. Merchant ships are not strictly inspected. The problem is the castle district, which is heavily guarded. Without a special permit, you can't even enter." He had been holding it in for a long time. Over the past 2 days, Cajun Fells had asked him many questions, but none of them were related to the mission, let alone the secrets of the church. Cajun asked Farina in great detail about his prejudice against her, his insults, his escape, and how they helped each other. When he could not express himself in words, Cajun even asked his disciple Rentgen to pretend to be Farina and try to reconstruct the scenes in his memory. Except for mealtimes, he could not even see Sean and the others. It was as if they did not care about the rescue mission at all. Therefore, Joe seized the opportunity to speak his mind as fast as he could. Regardless of whether the other side would listen to him or not, as long as it was useful, he would have a better chance of rescuing Farina. "You don't have to worry about that. We have our own ways," Sean interrupted him. "I asked you to meet someone and get to know him." "Who is it?" "The guide of this mission." After he finished speaking, he whistled, and 2 sailors quickly escorted a middle-aged man over. Charles recognized the man at a glance. "Hagrid, you traitor." Hagrid was also a follower of the church. Before he was transferred to assist Bishop Lorenzo, Hagrid had been Joe's superior. "Tsk," Hagrid said disdainfully. "You speak as if you are loyal to the church. If Farina finds out that you've sided with Greycastle, who knows who she'll call a traitor?" Charles was at a loss for words. "There's no need to argue." Sean stood between the 2. "Mr. Hagrid, you should know your mission, right?" Facing the king's personal guard, Hagrid's voice immediately became much softer. "Yes, my lord. Bring those 2 warriors into the castle. This is your only chance to redeem yourself. Whether you can grasp it or not is up to you. Entering the castle is not a problem. But sir, are you sure that only 2 will be enough?" He was actually worried about Greycastle. Joe was stunned for a while before he came to his senses. No matter how many people Hagrid brought in, it would be an intolerable betrayal to Lorenzo. If Greycastle failed, he would not have a good ending either, so he might as well hope that Hagrid could be more thorough. "Don't worry. You'll soon see." Sean looked at the outline of the Archduke Island and sneered. "They're the real scourge who has obtained power." In the dead of night, the 6 members of the rescue team left the dock and headed for the castle. In addition to Zoe and Betty, there were 2 soldiers from the First Army. Obviously, they were responsible for guarding Joe and Hagrid. With the Count's trusted aide as a guide, the journey could be said to be unimpeded. Even if the patrol team came to question them, they would be dismissed by Hagrid with a few words. The same went for the guards at the entrance of the castle. Even though the other 5 people were all wearing hoods, the guards did not question them. From this point of view, Hagrid was indeed trusted by Lorenzo. After passing through the courtyard, the Lord's castle appeared in front of them. According to Hagrid, Farina's attack had frightened Earl Lorenzo so much that he had gathered all the God's Punishment Army soldiers who could still move into the bedroom in the main building. There were no more than 6 of them. The bedroom door had also been replaced with a solid copper door. It was said that ordinary people could not even push it open, let alone break the lock. Usually, Scourge had to open the copper door to get in and out of the bedroom. It's not difficult to trick Lorenzo out of the bedroom. You just need to say that you've found the secret of the treasure. Hagrid said as they walked. But he'll definitely take Scourge with him. Besides, strangers in the hall will make the guards even more vigilant. We have to find a way to fool them. No need. Just tell us which floor the bedroom is on. Zoe shrugged. Then take Joe to the dungeon and rescue the woman. As for how we fight, it's none of your business. Hagrid was stunned for a moment before he replied, yes. I got it. He straightened his bow tie, climbed the stone steps, and knocked on the side door. An old gatekeeper poked his head out and said, Lord Hagrid, why didn't you inform us beforehand that you were coming back? Cut the crap. I have something important to report to the Earl. Get out of the way. Okay. The old man hurriedly stepped aside to make way for Hagrid. But these people are my informants in the Cage Mountain. Why, do you want to pry into the Earl's secret? I dare not. The old man immediately lowered his head. After entering the room through the side door, and passing through 2 partitions, they entered the castle. The guards at the entrance of the hall had been replaced by armored family guards. Seeing them, 2 guards grasped the hilts of their swords at their waists and approached them. Lorenzo's bedroom is on the 4th floor. But I can't take you up there, Hagrid said in a low voice. Oh, isn't this Lord Hagrid? The Earl has been talking about you recently. Are these the guests that you invited? The guard bowed and turned to Zoe and the others. Please wait outside the hall unless the Earl approves. Wait, this lady. Zoe lifted her hood and slowly walked toward him. Before he could finish his warning, a hand grabbed his neck. Lord Hagrid, this. The other guard did the same. Before he could draw his sword, Betty's hand had already grabbed his neck. Crack. With a crisp sound, the guard's neck was suddenly twisted into a corner. Hagrid and Joe could not help but gasp. Breaking a person's neck with one hand. Was this something that a human could do? But that was not all. They carried the guards into the hall, and hid themselves behind them. This strange scene made the remaining guards unable to react immediately. Hey, what the hell are you doing? No, look, their feet aren't on the ground. What? The dim firelight affected everyone's vision. When they realized something was wrong, it was too late. Zoe and Betty flashed out like shadows and pounced on the unprepared guards, aiming at their exposed necks. It was easy for people to relax during the long night watch, and their opponents just happened to be the strongest warriors among humans, extraordinaires. Joe could not help but cover his mouth. In just a few seconds, the remaining 4 guards' necks were also broken, and they fell to the ground in disorder. He had only seen such overwhelming strength and speed from the God's Punishment Army. But the God's Punishment Army was obviously a group of monsters without the ability to think. It was not difficult for them to tear their enemies apart with their bare hands, but it was almost impossible for them to kill them silently and cleverly like this. He saw the same shock on Hagrid's face. They have gained full power. They are the real Scourge. Sean's words echoed in Joe's mind. Was this also Roland Wimbledon's masterpiece? He was not sure that His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff knew this secret the best. Next, act according to the plan. Zoe glanced at Joe. No matter whether the person you want to save is dead or alive, don't stay in the dungeon. Do you understand? I understand. After getting the answer, the 2 turned around and ran toward the stairs. There were no guards on the stairs, so Zoe and Betty went straight up to the 4th floor. There were doors on both sides of the narrow corridor, which should be for maids or servants. At the end of the corridor was a huge metal door, which reflected a dark red light under the flickering candlelight. It's really a copper door. Zoe raised her eyebrows. What are you going to do? Betty curled her lips. If there's an iron lock behind it, I don't think it can be broken. Isn't that obvious? If there's no way, then we'll open a way. I think that's true. Betty kicked open the wooden door next to the Lord's bedroom and strode into the room. Ah, a scream was heard. The maid, who only had a thin veil over her body, suddenly pulled up the quilt to cover her half-exposed chest. Who are you? Unfortunately, I'm not interested in girls. Betty untied her belt, and her robe slid down naturally, revealing a firearm with an astonishing caliber on her back. If it's a handsome boy, you'll only make her more panicked. Zoe sighed and held the shotgun in her hand. 1, 2, 3. The two aimed the muzzles at the wall and pulled the triggers together. Deafening explosions sounded continuously. The interior walls made of bricks simply could not withstand the repeated bombardment of the 40mm ammunition. Under the flying debris, 2 rows of crooked bullet holes quickly appeared on the walls. Chapter 11:15. Amidst the smoke and dust, she immediately spotted the target of this operation. Count Lorenzo. Apparently, he had just woken up from a sweet dream. He was sitting on the edge of the bed and putting on his pants in a panic. Scourge, who was guarding the bed, had already pulled out his dagger and pounced on the collapsed wall. Breaking through the wall had obviously violated the bottom line of these bodies. As long as the prior order was to kill any enemy that broke into the room, even if the controller was unconscious, Scourge would automatically respond. "Betty!" Zoe shouted. "Understood." The latter followed closely behind, kneeling on one leg and clenching her hands into bowls. "Come on." Long-term training and cooperation had made the two of them telepathic. Zoe did not even look back and directly jumped backward. Betty caught her accurately. With a push of her hands, Zoe leaped into the air and flew over Scourge's head like a swallow. Then, she grabbed the chandelier on the arched ceiling and swayed. In the blink of an eye, she was already on top of the bed. The spacious and luxuriously furnished bedroom provided a very comfortable space for the Lord to enjoy and also became her stage. Zoe directly raised the shotgun in the air. Time seemed to stop. Scourge was still turning around, but obviously, it was too late for him to keep up with her. Betty, on the other hand, had her back to the big bed and put on a victory pose. Obviously, this bad habit came from the dream world. Real men never turned around to look at explosions and the aesthetics of combat. She did not even consider that it was all magic movie special effects. However, seeing that Betty only tilted her body and was still paying attention to Scourge's movements, Zoe did not bother to argue with her. As for Count Lorenzo, he looked up in horror, his eyes full of disbelief. From the moment he fired the shotgun until now, only a few dozen seconds had passed. For him, he probably never thought that the defense line formed by Scourge would be so fragile. The chandelier fell apart under the tremendous force, and burning candles danced in the air like flickering fireflies. In the midst of the flames, Zoe aimed at the target and pulled the trigger. Boom! With a loud bang, time resumed its flow. A mist of blood instantly rose from the Count's body. Dozens of steel balls fell from above, and almost completely enveloped him. Under the powerful impact, he first sank, then bounced up, and when he landed again he was already twisted into a ball like a rag. Zoe's feet then stepped on the bed, and the bed frame that had been ravaged finally couldn't take it anymore. With a bang, it collapsed into a pile of broken wood. At the same time, Scourge suddenly stopped moving. Except for the imperfect landing, you got full marks for everything else. Betty whistled. It would be even better if you had a pair of sunglasses. Zoe rolled her eyes at her. Let's recycle the body first before talking nonsense. Yes. Betty shrugged, took out a small horn from her waist pocket, put it to her mouth and blew it. It was a special tune, and it was also a fragment of Scourge's memory during the transformation process. For an ownerless body, it was equivalent to an activation command. From now on, I'm your new master. Betty cleared her throat and said word by word. The 6 Scourge clenched their fists in front of their chests. But only until we return to Neverwinter. When we arrive at the 3rd border city, you'll be thrown into the storage room for everyone to use. If you're good-looking, you'll have a chance to see the light of day again. Otherwise, you'll be scrapped. Of course, I don't think you'll have much hope, Betty said half-jokingly, although she knew these bodies wouldn't react at all. The magic blood had destroyed the self-consciousness of the original owners. Zoe opened the bronze door and saw many guards rushing toward the Lord's bedroom at the end of the corridor. She also heard hurried footsteps upstairs and downstairs. Apparently, the short battle had completely broken the peace of the night, and the entire castle district had entered a state of defense. Do you see those guys in armor? Betty smiled. Go and kill them. As soon as she finished speaking, the God's punishment warriors rushed out from behind her like wild beasts. They raised their swords and rushed toward the guards. Under the surprised and puzzled gazes of the guards, the gods' punishment warriors thrust their swords into their chests. The castle seemed to be boiling, with the soldiers of the First Army clearing the way and Hagrid covering for them. Joe entered the dungeon without any trouble. However, when he saw Farina hanging on the rack, he felt as if his chest had been smashed by a hammer, and an indescribable pain gripped his heart. The dazzling woman was now like a piece of dead wood that had been drained of all vitality, hanging powerlessly on the chain. There was hardly a patch of smooth skin on her body, and the crisscross whip marks spread from her shoulders to her legs. Places like the back and chest were the main areas of destruction. Thick liquid was flowing from the red and swollen marks, which were obviously wounds that had not been properly treated after being burned by a soldering iron. Judging from the interrogation, she did not choose to surrender to Lorenzo even though she had been tortured like this. Joe trembled as he walked toward her, feeling that every step was extremely difficult. However, the soldiers reacted faster. They untied the chains and released Farina from the rack. "Is this the person you want to save? Don't just stand there, come and help." Yes. Joe seemed to have woken up from a dream. He picked up Farina and laid her flat on the straw couch. The soldier seemed to have been prepared for this. He took out a bunch of bottles and jars from his backpack and began to give her emergency treatment. Although Joe did not know what the effects of those potions were, he could tell from Farina's gradually calming breathing that they were effective. While he was helping to bandage her wounds, Farina suddenly moaned and opened her eyes slightly. "Ow. How could it be you?" she murmured. "Am I dreaming?" "No, it's not a dream. It's all over." Joe held her face in his hands and replied in a choked voice. "All over?" Farina paused for a moment. "I see. I'm dead, right? That's why I saw you in the dungeon." She slowly raised her hand and touched Joe's cheek with her twisted fingers. Lorenzo had not only pulled out her nails, but also broken her fingers one by one. At that moment, it looked more like a withered branch than a hand. "I'm sorry that I couldn't continue the church. I've let you down. I don't care at all." Joe felt a warm trickle down his cheeks. "And it's not your fault at all. Are you comforting me? Strange. You've never been like this before." Farina's bloody lips parted. "No matter what, don't go away. Stay with me for a while, okay?" Joe could no longer hold back his tears and hugged her tightly. "I'll stay with you. No matter where you go, I'll be by your side. Even if I die." Chapter 11:16. Farina had a dream. The whizzing of the whip, the cursing of the enemy, and the excruciating pain gradually left her. Everything around her was pure white, and the ground was so smooth that it could reflect her appearance. This world seemed to have no boundaries, and the only landmark was a tall stone gate in the distance. Behind the gate, there was a faint melody, sacred and pleasant. "Maybe this is what people see before they die," she thought to herself. After walking this last distance, she would arrive at the land of eternal peace. Farina was not satisfied. In the end, she could not kill the traitor with her own hands and avenge everyone who followed her here. At the same time, she felt a lot of guilt. Tokhtar's task had gone down the drain. She was indeed not a person who could shoulder the responsibility alone, and she was not even a qualified leader. Her talent was just so-so. The only reassuring thing was that she didn't beg for mercy in the end, especially when the red-hot iron needle pierced her fingertip. She almost thought she would completely collapse in the next moment. Now that she thought about it, she still felt it was a bit unbelievable that she could hold on until the end. Otherwise, she would not be able to face her comrades who died one step ahead of her. However, these emotions did not last long, and they scattered like dust. After all, she would soon enter her eternal sleep. No matter how she thought about it, there was no way to change it. Was there? Farina walked towards the stone gate step by step. According to the legends, there would be no more pain or sorrow there, and time would be frozen. Everything would remain in its most glorious moment, and it would be the cornerstone of God's kingdom forever. This should have been something to be happy about, but for some reason, she did not feel happy. Why is this? Farina. Just when she was at a loss, a hazy voice came from beside her. She remembered now. It was Joe's voice. He did not participate in the attack, so he could not have been captured by Lorenzo, so it was just her imagination. Even so, Farina suddenly felt relieved. So that's what happened, she thought. She just didn't want to finish this last journey alone. Even if she was entrusted with a responsibility that was beyond her ability, even if it was to shirk responsibility, she did not care. She longed for the feeling of being needed. She did not want to go on alone anymore. Don't go away. Stay with me for a while, okay? I will. The voice replied intermittently. No matter where you go, I will be by your side. Even in death. That was enough. Even if it was an illusion. She seemed to have returned to that winter several years ago, when she climbed Hermes alone. Just as she was about to collapse, a carriage stopped in front of her. Farina stepped onto the steps of the stone door and pushed it open. Thank you. The light behind the door shot out in all directions and instantly enveloped her. When the light dissipated, Farina opened her eyes and found that the ceiling above her head was shaking slowly. Is this what the divine kingdom looks like? It didn't look as glamorous as he had imagined. Furthermore, time did not seem to stop flowing. She tried to turn her head and saw a familiar face. Farina hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, Joe? Joe was lying next to her, as if he had fallen asleep. After calling his name a few times, he opened his sleepy eyes and looked at her. Then, an ecstatic expression appeared on Joe's face. You're awake? Awake? Farina frowned. Shouldn't I have Before she could finish her sentence, she felt the burning pain return to her body. Even the slightest movement was excruciating. You just fainted from exhaustion. Joe covered her head. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. Farina could not help but be stunned. After a long while, she came to her senses. Not only did she not die, but she also escaped from the dungeon. Did this mean, Lorenzo he's dead? After getting this unexpected answer, Farina suddenly felt refreshed. Really? How did you do it? It wasn't me who killed him. Joe shook his head. It was the King of Greycastle, His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. Roland Wimbledon. It was a name that she did not want to hear the most. What are you talking about? How could he possibly help us take back Archduke Island? She suddenly looked around and asked. Wait a minute, where is this place? Aren't we on Archduke Island? We're now on the sea, and our destination is Greycastle's city of Neverwinter. You've been in a coma for 3 days. You only survived because of the First Army's medicine, Joe said softly. Don't worry. I'll tell you everything. An hour later, Farina finally understood what had happened behind the scenes. I've also asked Sean about His Majesty's trial, Joe said. As long as you don't have the witch's blood on your hands, don't participate in the persecution, and don't slaughter the people of Greycastle, you won't be sentenced to death. You're a warrior of the Vanguard Battalion, and you've been stationed in the new holy city all year round to fight against demonic beasts. I used to be a priest's assistant, so I can't meet those witches. In other words, both of us can survive. He became more excited as he spoke. Although you're badly injured, there's a witch named Nana in Neverwinter. She can cure any kind of injury as long as you pay. I'll find a way to pay for it. No matter how much she wants, I'll definitely help you stand up again. In order to prevent her from escaping, Lorenzo had broken the tendons in her hands and feet, and smashed her knees with a hammer. She was now a cripple. But this was not the focus of Farina's attention. Because of me. What? Because of me, you made a deal with that devil? She rebuked him angrily. He destroyed the church and all hope. How can you face Lord Tuckerthor? Cough cough. Farina. Don't touch me. She choked and spat out some blood. The fate of the world, the fate of all human beings, was destroyed by him alone. How can you ask him for help? Compared to the battle of divine will, my life is not worth mentioning. Even if you save me, what's the point? I'd rather go to hell and wait for him, until the moment he falls into the abyss. Clap, clap, clap. Suddenly, there was a round of applause outside the room. I'm so touched. I didn't expect to receive such support from mortals after more than 400 years. What a surprise. A woman pushed the door open and walked in. I support the church that strives for the future of human beings, not the minions of the king of Grey Castle. Farina endured the sharp pain in her chest and scolded. But before she could finish her words, she was stunned. Innova? Legion commander? At that moment, she almost suspected that there was something wrong with her eyes. In the martial arts hall of the new holy city hung the portraits of the outstanding leaders of the Judgment Army. Most of them had received the highest honor bestowed by the Pope, the Scourge Transformation Ceremony. They could be regarded as the elites of the elites. Innova had served as the Legion commander of the Judgment Army, which could be said to be the highest rank a female warrior could reach. Because of this, Farina had always regarded her as her goal. But the problem was, Innova was a figure from more than 100 years ago. Chapter 11:17. Commander. Your Excellency? It took Joe quite a while to realize the identity of Farina, and why he had felt a sense of familiarity when they first met. However, how could this be possible? I can't understand. You should have died bravely in the defense battle during the months of demons. Farina swallowed. And Scourge is a pious warrior who has dedicated his body and mind to God. They almost never speak like a mute. Zoe interrupted. This has nothing to do with piety. They can't speak only because their brains have been cleaned. If they don't do this, they can't become a qualified body for us to use. Body? Use? What are you talking about? Let me ask you first. How did the church promote the God's punishment army? Joe answered first. Warriors who have the power of God are the nemesis of evil witches, and the church's greatest hope to save the world. Only determined and fearless believers can have this honor. He paused for a while. We used to think that saving the world was to guard the big breach and prevent demonic beasts from invading the mainland. However, we learned about the battle of divine will and the existence of demons in the will of Lord Toktar. So the God's punishment army is actually a special force to fight against demons, Farina continued. Only Hermes' Privy Council knows how to carry out the transformation ceremony, but now Roland Wimbledon has ruined everything. It sounds really touching, but it's a pity that none of it is true. Zoe smiled contemptuously. Your so-called God's punishment army was created for the sole purpose of suppressing witches and maintaining the rule of usurpers. Although the origin of all this is to continue the human race, the one who made the plan is not the church, but the witches. Farina had a look of disbelief on her face. If the other party was not the famous Innova, who was her idol, she would have retorted loudly. Joe took a deep breath. Can you tell us more about it? Well, let me satisfy your curiosity, mortals. Zoe smiled. When the man stopped talking, Farina felt a sharp pain in her fingers. She did not know when she had clenched her fists, but her broken fingers were bleeding again. She finally understood why the historical figures had appeared so vividly in front of her. The Innova in front of him was not the Judgment Army commander, but an ancient witch who had lived for more than 400 years. Normally, she would have shouted blasphemy and drawn her sword to fight to the death. Even if she couldn't win, she couldn't allow an evil person to control the corpse of a hero. But now, she felt that all the strength in her body was slipping away from her fingers. This was ridiculous. This was simply too absurd. According to him, the witches had single-handedly created all of this. Minions of the devil? The incarnation of evil? What a joke. They were the ones who sacrificed everything for humanity. They were the true fearless heroes. The Queen of Starfall City's courage to sacrifice herself had surpassed most people in the world. Was there anything more ironic than this? The goal that she was proud of was set by the witches that she was hostile to. The transformation ceremony that she yearned for was just a body for the witches. Even the reason why the world had become what it was now was inseparable from the witches. Refute her, say that all of this is fake, fabricated. Although there was a voice in her heart shouting, Farina opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because there were too many details that could be matched. For example, the rumor of Scourge's mysterious disappearance. For example, the female corpses that seemed to have been sucked dry. For example, the huge monastery in the old holy city. For example, the pure witches who looked no different from witches. If the lies could be so perfect, They had to have been lurking in the church for at least decades, and had access to the core secrets of the Privy Council. At present, the only people who could meet these conditions were the popes of the past. Moreover, there was another decisive piece of evidence, and that was power. Since the ultimate goal of Scourge was to fight against the devil, it was no doubt that the stronger the better. There was no doubt that intelligent life with divine sense would always be much stronger than beasts without divine sense. The fact that only 2 witches could easily conquer the castle on Archduke Island guarded by Scourge was proof. If witches and God's punishment bodies were so compatible, why did the church kill them instead of making good use of them? Even if wild witches were extremely evil, the pure witches should be suitable. But the fact was that there had never been a God's punishment witch in Hermes. She had come to a conclusion in her mind. The pure witches could be controlled by God's stone. However, the church had no means to control a God's punishment witch who was equivalent to an extraordinary. Therefore, no matter how strong the latter was, they would not consider it. If His Holiness in the Holy City was really wholeheartedly for humanity, she believed that there were many believers who were willing to sacrifice themselves, and it was not surprising that there were a few witches among them. However, from the beginning, the Holy City had cut off this possibility. Saving the world was not as important as they claimed. It was as if they were mocking her. She thought helplessly, Scourge was not a trump card against the devil, but a tool to suppress witches. That was all. Obviously, Joe was also aware of this contradiction. He asked cautiously, "How many people like you are there in Neverwinter?" "Hundreds of them," Zoe shrugged. "And they're all using the bodies you've given us. In the future, don't make a fuss when you meet someone you know." Farina vaguely guessed the reason why Joe asked such a question. If 1 or 2 sacrificed Scourge could be impersonated by a witch, it was absolutely impossible for hundreds of them to be impersonated. The fact that Joe could answer so calmly was a proof in itself. Even the last trace of luck was gone. Farina felt that something in her heart was gradually leaving her. She longed for the feeling of being needed. The church originally carried light and hope, and as a member of the church, she naturally shouldered these responsibilities. Behind her were the 4 kingdoms, and the entire human race. But now they were peeling away bit by bit, like a mottled and weathered wall. Behind the wall, there was nothing, like the nothingness in a dream. She had to do something. The church can change this result, put everything back on the right track. Farina said with difficulty. "What?" Zoe looked at her. "The God's Punishment Witches Project needs bodies, right? Only the church can provide them for you, such as me." She took a deep breath and said, "I'm willing to lead the transformation." "Oh." Zoe revealed a playful smile. "Even if you lose your mind?" "Farina," Joe shouted. "If that would help humans dash, in this way, there would be light behind her, and she would still be needed." Interesting mortal. But Zoe mercilessly shattered her fantasy. But the God's Punishment Witches project has long been abandoned. Why? Because it's useless. Zoe spread out her hands and said, "According to the situation 400 years ago, it might have the power to fight, but now the demons can't be defeated by the God's Punishment Witches alone. So we all turn to the common king of Grey Castle. It's that simple." Farina opened her mouth, but could only make some hissing sounds. No matter how weak a living witch is, as long as we find the right direction, she'll be far more useful than magic blood and a body. Although His Majesty discovered this, we're also very good at learning. And now it's basically a common understanding. Zoe stood up and walked to the door. "That is to say, even if you're willing to become a body, no witch will donate her blood, because it's not worth it." She stopped when she passed the threshold and looked back with a smile. "I'll be frank. The church's appearance was a mistake from the beginning." In an instant, Farina heard a crisp sound. Chapter 11:18. You rarely talk so much to a mortal. When they walked out of the cabin, Betty, who had been waiting by the aisle, followed them. "I talk more to His Majesty," Zoe said carelessly. "But we all know that he's not a real mortal." Betty pretended to feel sorry. "Sean only wanted you to talk about the origin of the church. After all, the God's Punishment Witches are more persuasive. But look at what you're saying." It's not worth it at all. It was a mistake from the beginning. Tisk, she's still a patient. Aren't you afraid that she won't be able to catch her breath and suffocate to death? Our mission is to recover the ancient treasure and rescue the captive believers. As for whether she lives or dies, what does it have to do with me? Zoe stopped and looked back at Betty. I say, when did you start to care so much about a mortal? Shouldn't people care about each other? Anyone but you wouldn't say something like that. Zoe paused. Wait, you're just gloating, aren't you? Don't say it out loud. Betty laughed. Because I think the same thing as you. Sure enough, Zoe sighed. She does look like one. Yes, they're practically carved from the same mold. Betty walked up to Zoe and leaned over the porthole. If she was born 400 years earlier. If she was also a witch, then at the last meeting of the Union. She would have chosen to follow Lady Alice instead of us, Zoe said. That's why it's so infuriating. Farina didn't look like a person, but a group of people. A group of Union witches who had survived and had a bleak future ahead of them. There weren't many choices left in front of them. Even so, most of them did not give up hope. Compared to the chosen one, who had no clue, the God's punishment witches' plan, which relied on their own strength to achieve their goals step by step, won more people's support, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. In that fateful meeting, Alice had completely overwhelmed Natalia. The shouts of humans shall never perish. Witches shall live forever, were almost the only voices in the meeting. In fact, even many of Natalia's followers were hesitant, not knowing whether they could see the light of day on this road. She could only stand aside and worry for Queen Chaser, unable to get a word in. His attitude towards Farina was just to vent his anger on her. What Zoe wanted to refute was not a believer of the church, but the Union of the past. She wanted to tell them that the weak witches still had a chance to make a comeback. She wanted to tell them that ignorant and short-sighted mortals were not completely useless. What she really wanted to say was, just wait a little longer. Don't draw your sword against each other because of differences. But in the end, all these thoughts turned into a sigh. If they could not produce conclusive evidence, even if they had to start all over again, the three chiefs would definitely walk the same path. In that precarious and gloomy moment, only those with a heart of steel could lead the people forward. If only Alice Eleanor and Lady Natalia could see all of this, how great would it be? Zoe murmured, looking at the boundless blue sea. On the other side of the room, Cajun put down his pen in surprise. Teacher, this. Renkin was equally shocked. She obviously did not expect to hear such a subversive conversation. Don't tell me we know too much? In order to better understand the story between Charles and Farina, Sean had specially prepared a cabin next to the ward for the two of them to use as a study. He had also tampered with the partition wall. A seemingly ordinary glass mirror used for decoration had the ability to transmit light in one direction. Through this hole, in the wall that was a few inches wide, they could clearly see the situation in the entire room. In addition, there were also two loudspeakers in the corner of the wall, so they could clearly hear the conversation on the other side of the wall. This was also the first time for Cajun Fells to have such an observation experience. Although he knew it was not appropriate, he could not resist the temptation. What could be more realistic than this? The people in the room were like actors, performing a play called reality, and he was the audience and the recorder. They had thought it was a story about love and redemption, but they had instead heard about the unknown past of the church. This news was too shocking for them. The four kingdoms all originated from the Witch Empire? The church was created by the Witch Union? And the ancient witches even had the means to occupy the bodies of ordinary people? No matter what news it was, it would cause a huge uproar. Rentgen looked at the door anxiously, as if she would be thrown into the sea at any moment by the guards who would rush in, put her in a sack, and throw her into the sea. His Majesty's words came to Cajun's mind. It reflects the flower of love that was bred in the darkest of times. I think you understand what I mean by adaptation. Perhaps. His Majesty had predicted all this? No matter what, it was impossible for him to get out of it. Even if he could, he would not do so. Cajun had a hunch that something bad was about to happen. This play would be an unprecedented milestone. Just then, Rentgen began to move again. He hurriedly picked up the loudspeaker. In the end, it turned out like this. Farina's eyes seemed to have lost focus. She was looking at Cajun, but her eyes seemed to penetrate him and fall on the empty space. The church is gone. And no one needs me anymore. You saved me, but I can't give you anything in return. I'm sorry. Her voice was getting lower and lower, as if she would leave at any time. Cajun grabbed her hand, his heart aching. I didn't save you for the church. His voice was so loud that Farina couldn't help but be stunned. I didn't have any hope for the church from the beginning. I just wanted to get by. I pretended to be pious in front of everyone because it would help me get promoted. I used to be a noble. How could I give everything to God? You. Farina bit her lip. Her eyes became focused again. She struggled to raise her hand, as if she was going to slap Cajun. Cajun did not move. He even slightly raised his head. Cajun did not slap Rankin. You're lying to me, aren't you? You followed me to the kingdom of Wolfheart after the defeat of the God's punishment army. How could you not have any hope for the church? Cajun grabbed her arm. Because I want to be by your side. The Supreme Pontiff and the Battle of Divine Will are all bullshit in my eyes. Cajun, let me finish. He had been waiting for this opportunity for too long. He had thought that he had lost Rankin forever. Now that he had a chance, he would not let it go. After I learned that you were captured, I tried everything I could to save you. None of them had anything to do with Hermes' future. I knew that even without the church, the world would be the same to me. Only you. I don't want to lose you. I need you. Crack. The tip of the quill in Cajun's hand broke. Need me? Farina was stunned. Chapter 11:19. A week later, in the valley of the impassable mountain range. Since the last napalm test, this place had become a new weapon testing site. It was closer to the North Slope laboratory, and no matter how loud the noise was, it would be hard to attract the public's attention. With the development of the misty forest, the flow of people inside and outside the northwest city wall was much higher than before. Obviously, the previous method of testing weapons in an isolated area on the grassland was no longer suitable. Considering that the power of weapons would further increase in the future, it was reasonable to move the testing site. And this time, the weapon Roland was going to test was the single anti-demon grenade that he had previously decided to research. Due to the overall industrial progress and sufficient preparation of materials, it only took 5 days from the trial production to the actual firing, which was the fastest time in the history of weapon development in Neverwinter. Of course, this had something to do with the exceptionally simple structure of the single anti-demon grenade. In the other world, even the weakest extremists could make huge RPGs out of gas tanks and drainage pipes. If they were installed on pickup trucks, they could even turn them into multi-mounted self-propelled artillery, not to mention Neverwinter, which was supported by an entire industrial system. Just aim the warhead at the target and press the trigger, right? Wuxia asked excitedly as she rolled up the launcher with her tentacles. Apparently, as a former senior blessed warrior, she was very interested in new firearms, not to mention that this weapon was specially developed to fight against demons. However, this scene was a little strange in Roland's eyes. A gigantic blob-like monster with tentacles all over its body was a common character in horror stories. Some of them shot light from their eyes, some relied on swords, guns and shields, and some relied on powerful suction cups and secreted special liquids to fight against the heroes. But what about holding an RPG? Ugh, something was not quite right. However, Roland had asked the original carrier to be a tester for safety reasons. Once the single anti-demon grenade accidentally exploded, the soldiers operating it at close range would basically end up in the same situation. Even the God's punishment witches would not fare any better. Only the original carrier could extend its tentacles to a safe place to avoid a tragedy. Just don't let the tail point at yourself or others. Roland coughed twice. Let's begin. Wuxia pointed at the main tentacle and pressed the trigger. A streak of fire shot out of the muzzle and headed straight for the target that was 100 meters away. After drawing a shallow arc, the bullet accurately hit the bottom of the target. Accompanied by an explosion, The metal box that was used as the target rolled back twice, seemingly unharmed. Compared to the earth-shattering bombardment of the Longsong cannons, or the overwhelming napalm flames, this was arguably the experiment with the least noise. In fact, not to mention the flames of the explosion, even the dust and gravel that were stirred up were few and far between. In just a few seconds, they were all blown away by the mountain breeze. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Only Roland smiled. Go get it for me to take a look. Soon, two God's punishment witches ran back with the metal box. This is... Only after observing it from a close distance did everyone notice that the bottom of the box was white, as if it had been burned by something. In the center of the white spot, there was an inconspicuous dent about the thickness of 3 fingers. It pierced through. Pasha asked curiously. Although it wasn't slow when it flew, it wasn't fast either. At least, it was much more eye-catching than a bullet. Revolver muskets can't pierce through this box, right? Even a Mark I-type heavy machine gun might not be able to do it. Wuxia leaned over. This iron coffin is a complete imitation of the stone pillar that the spider demons threw. It's covered with a finger-thick steel plate in every direction, so it won't be easy to pierce through. Right, isn't there a test subject inside? Let's open it and have a look. She stretched out 2 tentacles and lifted the heavy lid of the box. Everyone immediately let out a low cry of surprise. In order to simulate the demon in the stone pillar, several live chickens were stuffed into the box and hung on the wall with iron wires. But now there were only a few pieces of meat left inside, as well as a layer of chicken feathers that emitted a burnt smell. Looks like it worked well. Roland nodded with satisfaction. He was not surprised by the result. On the contrary, it was even more surprising that Wuxia could hit the target on her first try. According to Roland's plan, she should have fired at least 5 or 6 shots. There was no dazzling flame or deafening roar. It was an unbreakable rule that the amount of ammunition was equal to the amount of light. However, there was a price to pay to fill in more ammunition, and the firing speed would be affected first. Based on the fixed amount of ammunition, the larger the warhead, the greater the resistance. The heavier the warhead, the slower the firing speed. In order to hit the senior demon as much as possible, Lauren gave up the advantage of the super caliber charge. The grenade was almost the same size as the 40mm barrel, and the front part was conical to reduce the friction with the air. From the results of the shooting, the bullet performed well in terms of speed and stability. Although it was much smaller than the Iron Fist, it was more than enough to deal with a 10mm armor plate. The thickness of the Iron Fist was equivalent to that of the demon's stone pillar. Do you think this weapon can hit a senior demon? Roland looked at Pasha and the others. Well, Wuxia was the first to speak. There are strong and weak senior demons, just like there are transcendents and transcendents. It's hard to generalize. If it's a speed-oriented demon or a magic slayer, to be honest, the probability of hitting it head-on is not high. Even if it sees the grenade being fired, it's enough time for them to dodge. But, she paused for a moment and then raised her voice. This is definitely an epic-making weapon, Your Majesty, because it has leveled the gap between the demons and the mortals, and made it possible to win with numbers. It's not an exaggeration to praise it with any words. Yes, Pasha said with a smile. Mortals can also hurt a senior demon, which is almost unimaginable in the past. If such a weapon existed in the tequila era, Lady Natalia would probably wake up laughing in her dreams. And I have a way to greatly increase its accuracy. Wuxia waved her main tentacle. Oh. Roland looked at her. What is it? Let the gods' punishment witches use it. Wuxia's voice was full of excitement. Only transcendents can keep up with a senior demon. If you shoot close to the demon's face, no matter how strong the enemy is, it's impossible to dodge the shot. Don't worry. Since it's an individual weapon, of course, everyone should have one. Roland smiled. Of course, the gods' punishment witches are no exception. The next test was to further increase the power while maintaining the firing speed and manufacturing cost, he thought to himself. Also, they should not waste the super caliber bullets. Although the senior demons could run fast, the abnormal parasites could too. Considering that they would have to invade the demon cities sooner or later, It was not impossible to encounter the spider demons in the streets. Therefore, it was necessary to develop new bullets in advance. While Roland was thinking, his guard suddenly brought him a piece of news. Chapter 11:20. In the office of the Lord's castle. 2 hours had passed since Sean had finished his report. All in all, the trip had been very successful. Zoe and Betty had not only brought back the ancient relics, but had also looted the treasury on Archduke Island with the help of the captured God's punishment warriors. All kinds of jewelry and ornaments were piled up in a cabin. The foundation of the Church of Hermes had been completely destroyed. No matter which noble in the kingdom of Wolfheart occupied Archduke Island, they would not have any connection with the church. Cajun Fells bade farewell to the captain of the guards as soon as he disembarked and returned to the hotel with his disciples. It seemed that he could not wait to start writing a new script. Farina and Joe, members of the church, were sent to prison to await trial by the Greycastle Security Bureau. "I'll leave them to you," Roland said softly, tilting his head. Nightingale pinched his shoulder to show that she understood. "So the rumored treasure, the magic ceremony cube, is in this lead box?" Roland looked at the gray box beside Sean's feet. According to the trader Hagrid's description, it was the size of a palm and looked like a cube made of polished stone. Considering the danger of strong radiation, Roland had asked the rescue team to prepare for it before he set off. "Yes, I took care of it as you ordered and didn't let anyone else touch it except for Zoe and Betty," Sean replied. "But before I put it in the lead box, I noticed something unusual." "What was it?" "Your Majesty, do you remember the reason why Lorenzo decided to send Hagrid to the Cage Mountain to gather information?" Roland thought for a moment and said, "Is it because the treasure that hasn't changed in the past 100 years emitted a blue light?" "Yes," Sean said, nodding. "When Miss Zoe brought back the magic ceremony cube, she said something that caught my attention. She said, 'The blue light seems to be changing.' I took a few more glances and found that the light was pointing at me like a compass. To be honest, I was so scared that I almost dropped the Rubik's Cube." This was simply like listening to a ghost story. Roland also felt goosebumps in his heart, but his expression didn't change as he said, "Did you find the reason in the end?" "Probably." Sean took something out of his pocket and handed it to the mahogany table. "After I calmed down, I thought that an ancient relic wouldn't react to an ordinary person. Something must have gone wrong. After some investigation, I found that it wasn't pointing at me but at this coin. It was a highly enriched uranium coin, which was used to search for ore sources. After Ozima returned to Neverwinter, she handed it over to Sean. In other words, the Rubik's ceremony cube was glowing because it sensed the uranium coin? This was really interesting." Roland pondered for a moment before saying, "I understand. You've completed this mission very well. You can go and rest first." "Yes, Your Majesty." After Sean excused himself, Nightingale appeared from the mist. She walked up to the lead box and looked around it. "Why, did you find anything?" "This is a magic artifact," Nightingale confirmed. "It looks like an unpolished stone, but it's definitely not that simple. In the mist, I saw a light similar to a magic cyclone, just like the magic core in the hands of the Tequila Witches." Sure enough, Roland thought. The influence of magic power on this world was probably more profound than he had imagined. Unfortunately, from the information they had gathered so far, there was a huge difference in the research and application of it among the various races. Without analytical methods, it was very difficult to carry out a systematic study. However, he also knew that an empirical formula was still a formula, and it was better than nothing. Just like before the emergence of classical mechanics, people still created all kinds of tools through observation and practice. Now that there was a new object of observation, naturally he had to explore it. "Let's go to the third border city," Roland said. "I wonder if Celine has prepared a special laboratory." In any case, this cursed relic should not be left in the castle until it was absolutely safe. "Why did you come back?" Pasha quickly came up to Roland when he entered the underground hall. "Is there something wrong with the new weapon?" Roland shook his head. "I asked Celine to expand the cave. How's the progress?" "Ah, are you talking about the metal chamber?" "Except for the elevator, The other parts are basically completed. She's in the chamber now. Do you want to go and have a look? After getting a positive answer, Pasha bent her main tentacle and said, "Please follow me." A week ago, when Roland decided to send God's punishment witches to the kingdom of Wolfheart, he also asked Celine to start preparing the necessary facilities for the research, a fully enclosed laboratory hidden deep underground with shielding functions. If the magic ceremony cube could really emit high-energy rays as he thought, it would undoubtedly be very risky to test it on the ground. Considering that the effect of Nana's treatment on radiation disease was still unknown, it was better to be cautious. Following the original carrier, Roland roughly told her what had happened in the kingdom of Wolfheart. "I see," Pasha said with a smile. "Leaving it to Celine is indeed the best choice. Whether it's the study of magic or the dismantling and restoration of relics, she's the best in the Quest Society. After switching to this body, her skills have improved by more than one level. I don't dare to say for others, but Celine is probably the only one who chose to merge with a carrier before Tequila showed any signs of defeat." Roland thought. Huh. Nightingale revealed a disgusted expression. "You mean she prefers tentacle sarcomas to her original body?" "If that's helpful for exploring the secrets of the world." Pasha shook her tentacles. When she was still in the Quest Society, she always complained that she didn't have enough hands, and that her body got tired too quickly. If she had mastered the soul transfer technology at that time, it's hard to say what she would have done. After walking for about 7 minutes, they came to the end of the tunnel and saw a vertical hole in front of them. "This is the entrance, but it will take a few days to install the elevator." Pasha lowered her main tentacle. "Please climb up." "Is this the only way to go down?" Nightingale looked at the countless wriggling tentacles and seemed a little afraid. "This is the fastest way," Pasha comforted her. "Don't worry. Although the tentacles are small and flexible, they are actually quite flexible and won't break when you step on them." Roland took a deep breath and climbed up the carrier's head along the main tentacle. He thought it would be as creepy as falling into a swarm of worms, but in fact it was as soft as a carpet. When Nightingale also climbed up, Pasha moved into the hole and quickly slid down to the bottom. Chapter 11:21. Although the laboratory was designed by him, Roland was still shocked when he saw it with his own eyes. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. In the pitch-black underground, the stone of lighting lit up the path ahead. The surrounding stone walls were covered with 2-meter square lead plates, forming a regular space the size of a basketball court. The smooth and even lead baffles were interlaced with each other. Cold light shone on them, making them look lifeless. However, it was precisely this kind of room that gave birth to a formless beauty. This was the beauty of the industrial age. If we don't win the battle of divine will, this place will become an ancient ruin after a few hundred years, right? Roland whispered. Moreover, it was a relic with a completely different style from the underground civilization and the demons. The fine abrasion marks on the lead plate were the marks left by humans. Perhaps so. Pasha gently put them down. But I have never believed as much as I do now. I believe that mankind will go to the end. I think so too. Roland smiled and walked into the laboratory. The entire room was divided into 2 areas, the operating area and the observation area. The 2 areas were separated by a concrete wall that was nearly half a meter thick, and the walls were also covered with lead plates. The glass placed in the center of the wall was specially made by Wuxia. Lead oxide was added to the conventional ingredients. Limited by the level of technology, the transparency of the lead glass was far less bright than that of the later generations, but at least it allowed people to clearly see the situation on the opposite side. "You have come, Your Majesty." A main tentacle stretched out from behind the door of the operating area, followed by Celine's huge body. Her appearance was like a scene from a horror movie, but the bolts and rulers wrapped around her auxiliary tentacles quickly weakened the feeling. "I heard Pasha's message when I was installing the last lead plate. Had Zoe and the others brought back the ancient relics?" "It's in this box." Roland placed the lead box on her main tentacle and walked into the operating area to check it carefully. "How is it?" This place is arranged according to your requirements. Celine raised her antennae. But is it really necessary to do this? If the curse was just a kind of light, wouldn't an ordinary wall be enough? Just in case. If it were as I supposed, the light it emitted would not only be invisible to the naked eye, but would be exceedingly penetrating. Ordinary walls can indeed block it, but they need to be at least a few meters thick. He turned around and looked at the two ancient witches. So, don't act on your intuition. Even if the original carrier has an extremely high resistance, before you completely understand the nature of the magic cube, you have to follow the rules and conduct experiments. Because the ionizing radiation would destroy the DNA structure of the cell, it would lead to the appearance of replication barriers. Therefore, the damage to tissues with fast metabolism was the greatest. Organs like the heart and brain, which would not be replaced once they matured, were much more resistant to ionizing radiation. Judging from the lifespan of the original carriers, which easily spanned several hundred years, their aging cycle was astonishingly long. In theory, they should also have a certain degree of immunity to radiation. This was also the reason why Roland asked Celine to do the test. Celine laughed. You look a lot like the president of the Quest Society. Don't worry, the Quest Society has always followed strict rules. I won't be careless. Roland nodded and said, Then let's begin. The isolation door was closed, leaving Celine alone in the operating room. The first rule of the experiment was that when studying the magic ceremony cube, all exits must be sealed. Except for the operator, the others could only wait in the observation area. Through the lead glass, Roland saw Celine open the box and take out the magic cube. Just as Sean had said, a faint blue light flowed through the cracks of the stone and pointed at the coin on the test bench. Interesting. Celine looked at it for a while. This thing hasn't been activated, right? The isolation wall blocked the sound transmission. Roland concentrated and replied in his mind. According to Sean, the Earl of Archduke Island still had close contact with it after it emitted the blue light, so I think it's just an indicator. I see. Celine grabbed the Rubik's Cube and countless tentacles surged towards it, instantly wrapping it into a ball. What is she doing? Nightingale asked. Sensing. Pasha explained. Tentacles are far more sensitive than human fingers. Not only do they have all the senses of touch, but they can also smell. They can also remember every bump and depression on the surface of an object. A magic genius like Celine could even construct the outline and details of the magic ceremony cube in her mind. Unfortunately, this part was described by the carrier's mind, so normal people would not be able to understand it. Can you see what she's sensing? Roland was a little surprised. If she's willing to share it. Pasha reached out a tentacle and pointed at the glass. Now the magic cube is in front of me. This was such a convenient ability, just like a mental network. He used to think that it could only transmit consciousness, but he did not expect that it could also share three-dimensional images. The length and width of the magic ceremony cube are almost the same, about 15 centimeters. The inside is hollow, and I can feel the cracks. It doesn't look like a hole. Celine suddenly said, What do you mean? It looks like it's made of several stones. Wait, I think I found the mechanism. As soon as Pasha finished speaking, the entangling tentacles dispersed, and a small opening appeared on the back of the magic cube, as if the entrance to a treasure that had been buried for many years had finally been opened. Amazing, Roland could not help but exclaim. You figured it out so quickly. It had been nearly 100 years since the magic ceremony cube was lost among the people, and the previous owners must have played with it a lot. However, according to the records, no one had noticed that it was actually not a complete stone. I told you it would be okay to give it to her, Pasha said with a smile. The magic core of the underground civilization was pieced together bit by Celine from a broken state. Your Majesty, I have an idea. Celine put her tentacle into the small opening and said, That's why it only reacted to this coin. You said that the magic cube had been silent for many years. At first, I thought it was because it had run out of magic power, like the magic stone or the sigil. But after getting the real thing, you should have noticed that there is still magic power in it. So what this thing lacks? Is it the element that makes the glory of the sun that you mentioned? That's what I thought. Roland curled up the corner of his mouth. You can try to put the coin in, but it may activate the magic cube, so you have to be prepared. Got it. Celine moved behind a baffle on one side of the test bench. It was an arc-shaped lead block with 4 holes in the center for the tentacles to pass through. It was like a huge shield with an observation hole. After she threw the coin into the magic cube, the opening immediately closed, and the light at the top turned dark red. Bingo! Roland and Nightingale looked at each other excitedly. Chapter 1122. Record 12th, the first day of the experiment. According to His Majesty's request, a hazard test was conducted. 30 roosters were placed evenly around the experiment table, one of which was directly illuminated by the red light. The exposure time was 5 minutes. The target rooster reacted violently, rushing left and right in the cage, while the other roosters showed no reaction. There was a slight burnt smell at the scene. After the exposure, a slight burn mark was found on the fallen feathers of the target rooster. But such a small damage was not enough to cause the feathers to break. It should have fallen off when the target was struggling. The owner of the feather seemed a bit listless, but overall, it was normal. From this point of view, it was less harmful than a torch. Recorder, Celine. 13th, the second day of the experiment. The situation changed. The target rooster began to have diarrhea and wailed, as if it was infected with a demonic plague. The other roosters were normal. His Majesty's expression seemed to be a bit solemn. Today, no new test was conducted. 14th, the third day of the experiment. The target rooster died. After dissection, it was found that the target's body was oozing water. Its internal organs were soaked in blood, and its skin was rotting, which was usually a symptom that would only appear one day after the death of an animal. In other words, the red light killed the chicken skin in advance while the target was still alive? This is very interesting. Thinking about the story of the Temple of the Cursed in Thorntown, as well as the scenes in the murals, it seems to be the case. The cursed were tortured while seemingly unharmed, until their entire body festered. Although they were still alive, they could only watch their body die bit by bit. This must be a terrible feeling. I take back what I said. Although its lethality was still less than a torch, its method was much stranger. However, His Majesty had his own opinion. He believed that the red light destroyed the self-renewal function of life. On a microscopic level invisible to the naked eye, the body is constantly growing and withering, forming a balance between the two. Therefore, once the growth is stopped, it will lead to a large area of necrosis. This is the essence of the so-called curse. Before there is more evidence to refute this theory, I agree. The microscope is a fascinating invention. Moreover, the information collected from the dream world could also corroborate the observation results, indicating that living organisms were constructed from constantly growing tiny cells. The reason why light could penetrate his body was because the surface of his body was actually full of holes. I felt that I was coming into contact with new territory. Unfortunately, I can't enter the dream world myself. It was said that in order to understand the relevant knowledge, one had to reach at least the high school level, and the general learning time was 9 years. As he expected, it was still too much for Phyllis and Elena to speed up the process. 16th, the fifth day of the experiment. All the roosters, dead or alive, were buried deep underground. The laboratory was thoroughly cleaned. 1 day later, the test continued. The target was changed to 3 cows. This was to test the magic ceremony cube's potential as a weapon, as well as the target's tolerance to red light. 20th, the 9th day of the experiment. The result was terrible. The 3 targets were illuminated for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and half an hour respectively. However, even the cow that was illuminated for the longest time survived for 4 days. Regardless of the demon's resistance, it was impossible for them to stand still and wait for the long period of illumination. Even if the curse could cause continuous damage, at least on the battlefield, victory or defeat could be determined in a split second. In the temple mural, the scene where the subject defeated the giant statue with the magic ceremony cube was just an exaggeration. Or maybe Their resistance to the light of curse was particularly weak. 21 SD, the 10th day of the experiment. Range test. After confirming that the magic ceremony cube would not cause harm to the surrounding areas, His Majesty agreed to the outdoor test. The test site was still at the bottom of the impassable mountain range. The result was quite disappointing. The range of the red light could not exceed 100 meters, and any obstacles could further reduce its penetrating distance. Some metal objects could even completely block the red light. For example, 10 stacked golden dragons. Even pure water could block the red light. This conclusion almost negates its usefulness as a weapon. 26th, the 15th day of the experiment. Taking advantage of Nana's return from the front line, the experiment was conducted. The result was between curable and uncurable. For example, if the irradiated cow only healed the rotten parts of the skin and organs, the situation would still worsen, and the healed parts would be infected with the curse again. However, we chose a small intact organ, removed it after treatment, and transplanted it into another healthy cow. It didn't worsen. In other words, it was possible to remove the curse by reconstructing the cow's body on a large scale. However, that was beyond the upper limit of Nana's magic power. If we wanted to prove it, we would need Spear Passy's channel ability, so we had to put it aside. To be on the safe side, it was better to define it as uncurable for the time being. By the way, cow number 1 finally died. It lived for 10 days. 28th, the 17th day of the experiment. The magic ceremony cube emitted blue light again. The coin was used up. Fortunately, His Majesty still had the same coin. However, it was the raw material for making the glory of the sun, which was rare and difficult to collect. I felt like I was wasting the most precious resource in the world. Besides, the magic power of the magic cube was almost depleted, but like the sigil, it could be replenished at any time. Considering the consumption, this kind of test shouldn't be continued any longer. After the scheduled resistance test is completed, I hope to be able to dismantle it. Roland heaved a sigh of relief and closed the official experiment log. You're looking at it again. Nightingale leaned back on the recliner and said while chewing on a piece of fish. Isn't the result obvious? The legendary ancient treasure is just an instrument of torture. Apart from being used to torture captives, it doesn't have any incredible effect. Indeed, just like the murals on the wall, the only purpose of the magic ceremony cube was to torture the enemy. The principle of the magic ceremony cube was similar to that of ionizing radiation, and the uranium coin was the raw material. The difference was that the magic ceremony cube could control the direction of high-energy particles, which was equivalent to directional radiation. Roland suspected that the beam of red light was only used to illuminate the target, similar to a laser sight. It was not the same as the ray itself. After all, it would be too unbelievable to see a neutron beam or a high-energy electron with the naked eye. At this point, the truth about the Temple of the Cursed and the mysterious death of the residents of Thorn Town were finally solved. A civilization that worshipped radioactive elements had created such a device with magic power. The device had a single function. After filling it with high-purity radioactive materials, it could produce a small amount of high-energy particles. As for why the device lost its effect after 100 meters, it probably had something to do with magic power. However, this conclusion made Roland feel a little empty. He had thought that the magic ceremony cube would be more advanced than that, but in the hands of the original owner, it was no different from a whip or a guillotine. This could also be considered the difference between civilizations. Your Majesty. Just then, Sean's voice came from outside the door. The tequila witches have sent us the latest experimental records. Bring it in. According to the plan, this test was the last one. Different animals would be irradiated for the same amount of time to determine the specific ratio of body size and tolerance. After that, all experiments on the magic ceremony cube would be suspended. After all, uranium was not easy to obtain, and there were more important uses for it. Roland opened the notebook that Sean handed to him and picked up the teacup. It was still Celine's handwriting. On the 30th, the 19th day of the experiment. The experiment finally came to an end. The result was clear. The larger the animal, the higher its tolerance to the red light. However, it would take some time to express it in numerical formulas. In addition, there was a little trouble during the experiment. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I wanted to use the remaining raw materials to see if it was lethal, so I aimed it at a fish in a glass tank. After 5 minutes of continuous illumination, the fish were still alive, but the water was already steaming. In other words, it was not as lethal as boiling water. If I continued to irradiate it, the magic ceremony cube would boil the water first, and then kill the fish. Maybe it could be used to make soup? Puff! Roland suddenly spat out the tea he had just drunk. What's wrong? Nightingale looked at him in surprise. I forgot about that. Roland murmured. He had been thinking about all kinds of advanced possibilities and applications, but he had neglected the most basic point. The nature of the ray was a kind of energy transmission, which could be used to boil water. Chapter 11:23. Roland immediately picked up the phone to the third border city and said, "Tell Celine not to dismantle the magic ceremony cube. I'll be right there." Yes, Your Majesty." The messenger on the other side of the phone obviously did not understand what was going on, but he still followed the order. "Take me to the border city." Roland turned to Nightingale and said, "As fast as you can." "Got it." The latter smiled and grabbed his hand. "You may feel a little dizzy." Then the two of them instantly disappeared into the mist. 5 minutes later. Roland appeared in the underground hall with his hand covering his mouth. He had to admit that Nightingale had become much more familiar with her ability than when they first met. Traveling in the black and white world was like surfing. The waves were overwhelming, but Celine could use them to move forward. Her movements were like floating clouds and flowing water. It was like a work of art. Roland, however, did not enjoy it so much, especially the changing contours that blurred the boundary between flat and three-dimensional. The feeling of the world turning upside down was 100 times more exciting than riding a roller coaster. "Finally, we're here." Nightingale smiled and patted him on the back. "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" Celine slowly descended from the top of the cave with a lot of tools in her hands. "I heard you were looking for me." Looking at the hammers, saws, and files on Celine's tentacles, Roland breathed a sigh of relief. "It seems that we made it. But why are there halberds and axes among the tools? Is she going to chop the magic cube into powder? Where is the ancient artifact? It's still in the underground laboratory." He took a deep breath and asked, "Can you replicate it?" Celine was obviously stunned. "Are you sure? Wasn't that thing completely useless?" "Maybe it's not useless." Roland briefly explained his idea. "The biggest drawback of steam power is that the fuel is too heavy. If there is a way to replace it with the Rubik's Cube, it is likely to bring a new round of revolution in industrial production." An efficient and powerful power source was always the core of the industry. Whether it was used in manufacturing, power generation, or equipment, it could cause a qualitative change. Of course, it would not be easy to take this step. The relationship between the traditional boiler and the Rubik's Cube was not a simple one. After switching to a new heating method, the thermal circulation and interaction system, control system, and maintenance would all change accordingly. Before success, he might have to face countless failures, but this was worth the effort to try. Boiling water. "I see." Celine thought for a moment and then said awkwardly, "But if I don't carefully explore the internal structure, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to replicate it. After all, it involves magic, and you don't allow me to dismantle it." I mean, don't disassemble it like it's trash." Roland coughed twice. "If it's for imitation purposes, it's certainly not a problem to carefully dissect it. Is there any careless disassembly?" Celine said in surprise. Then she sounded a little aggrieved. "When I was in the Quest Society, I had to be punished for damaging any relic. But from the time I joined the society until the fall of Tequila, I was never punished. Lady Natalia even praised me personally, saying that I had a pair of naturally skillful hands. If I was careless in my research, the core instruments in the hall would have been destroyed long ago." Faced with this boastful excuse, Roland looked at the tools in her hand doubtfully. You used to use them to disassemble relics? These? Celine was startled. How is that possible? Didn't you give the sisters new weapons and equipment? It turns out that no one uses those swords, spears, and axes. Instead of letting them rust in the warehouse, it's better to use them to make other things. I happen to be short of a few bookshelves in my database. By the way, why did you use these abandoned weapons as research tools? Nightingale suddenly covered her mouth and turned her head away. Judging from her slightly trembling shoulders, it seemed that she was having a hard time holding it in. Roland could not help feeling a little embarrassed. No, I thought you would go crazy when it comes to things related to magic power. It must be Pasha again, Celine said, using her main tentacles to support the huge tumor. She can't tell the difference between enthusiasm and interest. A real explorer needs to be clear-headed and meticulous, as well as precise and controllable actions. Working all night for a few days or muttering to herself in a book, it's not crazy at all. Seeing that Celine could not stop talking, Roland quickly interrupted her. Let's not talk about that. Are you sure that you can replicate the magic ceremony cube after you figure out its structure? Celine returned to normal when it came to business. It depends on the complexity of the magic ceremony cube. Although I can't be 100% sure, the possibility is not low. The magic ceremony cube has an obvious feature, which is that it can be manipulated without magic power, which means the biggest obstacle is no longer there. The most difficult thing to replicate is the way to use magic power. Roland immediately realized the key point. You're right. Celine nodded her main tentacles. Humans, demons, the underground civilization, and other races have different ways of using magic power, due to the differences in physiology and thinking. Take the magic stone for example. I'm afraid that we will never be able to embed it into our bodies like the demons and gain many abilities. Similarly, if I hadn't transformed into the original carrier, I wouldn't have been able to repair the magic core with my human body. Manipulating the magic ceremony cube without magic power means that I don't have to study what kind of magic cyclones this civilization had and how they used them. To be honest, without enough information, it's almost impossible to overcome this obstacle. But now, as long as I can make it exactly the same as the original, I can make the magic power have the same effect. Of course, this was still very difficult in the tequila era. Now that I can adjust the magic core at will, the situation is much better. Celine paused for a moment. But besides that, there's another obstacle that I need to solve. What is it? Materials, she said. I have been studying the Rubik's Cube these days, and I found that although it looks like a stone, it is not made of stone. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's the bones of an alien race, or the solidification of something else. Anyway, I need more samples. But you said that the Temple of the Cursed has been empty for many years. Even this relic's whereabouts are only known by chance. So it's still unknown whether I can use replacement materials to achieve the same effect. Materials, Roland muttered. Maybe there's another place where I can find something similar. Chapter 11:24. Here comes the ship, guys. Get moving. Simbadi raised his arms and yelled. Oh! The clansmen of the Fishbone clan swarmed to the dock and began to work. Some were responsible for fixing the mooring ropes, and some were responsible for building the gangplank. Although it looked like a mess, there was no delay in their work. As long as they did not board the ship, they were as good as experienced sailors. It was hard to imagine that a year and a half ago, these people had barely seen the sea, let alone done such a thing. Soon, all the supplies on the ship were moved away. Simbadi, they said we can ship the goods now. Red goods or black goods, and how many barrels of each? Have you asked them? Don't worry, I've memorized them all. Okay, let's get started. Goods was a commonly used abbreviation. The entire Endless Cape produced only one kind of goods, Styx River Blackwater. However, as the mining area expanded, the Sand Nation found that it had more than one color. In the other two underground valleys, there was dark red water and dark green water from the Styx River. They were also flammable, but had different properties and smells. Therefore, for convenience, people began to use goods instead of black water, which soon spread among northerners. This was the fourth time Simbadi had worked at the festive harbor. He remembered that when he first set foot on this barren desert, his first thought was that if he could survive, he must get as far away from this place as possible after 3 months. However, beyond his imagination, a city had gradually taken root in the southernmost part of the desert. If the recovery of the oasis was a miracle, then the festive harbor was a miracle. The reason why the endless cape became a place of exile was because it had nothing but danger. Even the most experienced hunter could not survive alone. To the Sand Nation, only the 3 gods were capable of building a city that could accommodate hundreds or even thousands of people. He had thought that the chief, who had underestimated the power of the desert, would completely give up this ridiculous idea after his attempt failed. However, he did not expect that the Sand Nation, who had lived here for hundreds of years, knew nothing about the desert. The endless cape wasn't completely empty. It was just that they had never realized it. The first problem to be overcome was the water source. The northern official named Concrete led them to build an endless reservoir, which was covered with a black membrane. At first, they did not see anything strange about it, but when the months of demons ended, the people of the Sand Nation found that the sun could really separate the white salt from the seawater. The water vapor condensed into dew on the thin film, and then flowed along the inclined surface into the pipe groove, and finally into the storage tank. The more intense the sunlight, the faster the water would be stored. Although a pond could not produce much fresh water, when hundreds of ponds were added together, the amount of water would be considerable. Now such reservoirs were still being expanded. Not only could they meet the needs of the Sand Nation, but they could also supply the ships of Neverwinter. This completely overturned the stereotype of the Sand Nation of the Majin clan. Secondly, there was the problem of housing. It was impossible to rely on a tent to withstand the midday sun. The closer it was to summer, the more difficult it would be. If there was no reliable place to hide from the heat, even if there was water, it would not last long. It was said that the stone of the Iron Sand City came from the southernmost region, before the desertification. This was also the reason why there were so many oases on the Silver Stream, but only one city. However, the northerners still used local materials. They built furnaces and used black water as fuel. They filled the furnaces with silt fished out from the bottom of the sea, and filtered fine yellow sand to make bricks. Since there was an endless supply of raw materials, the festive harbor soon had a batch of brick bungalows with double-layered walls and ceilings. Although it was not as good as the oases under the shade of the trees, it was still a stable shelter. Finally, there was food. Elder Thuram of the Osha clan commanded everyone to set up dozens of fishing nets on the beach. Every time the tide rose, the nets would be completely swallowed up by the seawater, and when the tide ebbed, a large number of strange prey such as crabs, sea snakes, sea urchins, and so on would appear in the square formed by the fishing nets. At first, Simbadi did not dare to eat these strange food, but under the threat of Thuram's whip, he had to bite the bullet and obey. He was surprised to find that the food tasted good, although the staple food still had to be transported from Neverwinter. The food they had was much better than a year and a half ago. Simbadi's attitude gradually changed after he had enough food and shelter. When the 3-month assignment was over, he chose to continue working in the festive harbor, which surprised even himself. After all, the salary here was much higher than in the port of Clearwater. Of course, he had another reason. After the last boat was filled, the busy day came to an end. Simbadi, thank you for your hard work today. See you tomorrow morning, brother. I want to go to the market later. Do you want to go with me? Simbadi had become the nominal leader of the Fishbone clan, because of his participation in the assignment. Whenever there was a task, he would be the first person Thuram would look for. In the face of such a change, he was really flattered. When he was still in the Silver Stream Oasis, he was an inconspicuous member of the clan. Not to mention being in charge of any affairs, there were not many people who were willing to talk to him. But now not only did the younger generation treat him as a leader, but some girls even extended a hand to him. Not only was he grateful to the great chieftain, he also felt a little proud. However, Simbadi did not accept those invitations, because he already had someone in his heart. Hey, wait for me, Simbadi. When he was about to leave the dock to find Molly, he heard a familiar voice. Simbadi could not help smiling. He turned around with a smile, but his expression suddenly froze. It was indeed Molly, the girl with long black braids. She was the only girl in the clan who did not dislike him. After Carlone, the favored one, left the dispatch team, Molly did not choose to quit, which was one of the main reasons why he persisted. Simbadi thought he might have a chance, but now he saw Molly holding a man's hand and running towards him. And that man was not a Majin clan man. Molly, you. And he. Simbadi stammered. Ah. Molly suddenly noticed that they were holding hands. She hurriedly loosened her grip and smiled embarrassedly. I was in a hurry to bring him to you, so I dragged him all the way here. Is that so? Phew, this lady is really strong. The man gasped. I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. It was as if I was being pulled by a bull. The Iron Zan nation of the Majin clan lives up to its name. He looked Simbadi up and down. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rex, and I come from the fjords across the sea. I know you're from the fjords, Simbadi said, standing in front of Molly warily. I don't have any relics to take back. You can go now. The festive harbor had been developing steadily, gradually expanding its territory and population. However, the past 3 months had completely broken the calm. The Endless Cape seemed to have become a popular shipping route overnight. A large number of fjord ships appeared in this new harbor city, bringing a series of troubles. These islanders, who claimed to be explorers, either dug holes or bought all kinds of strange things from the dispatch team. For a time, the festive harbor was in chaos. That's right, their swarming had indeed made this place extremely lively, and the gradually forming market was also quite popular with the Majins. In this way, everyone could use their salary to buy things they liked, instead of having to wait until they returned to the port of Clearwater to spend it. But what was more impressive was a series of negative news. For example, an explorer who wanted to explore the Styx River fell into the valley, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. In the end, it was the Majin clan who cleaned up the mess and rescued him. Another example was that some explorers bought suspicious stones and metal utensils from the Majin clan. But they used counterfeit money, which almost led to a violent conflict between the two sides. The most outrageous thing was that they even tried to steal the source of life in the festive harbor, as they coveted the strange membrane used for the cisterns. The roofs of several cisterns were missing. This incident eventually alerted the First Army, who arrested the criminals and sent them directly to Neverwinter. It was said that what awaited them was a lifetime of mine labor. Simbadi was wary of the fjord's people because of the endless troubles that kept coming. Chapter 1125. Huh. Simbadi twitched the corner of his mouth. You don't like to take shortcuts and reap without sowing? Most of the small clans had heard of the fjord's people. Not all of them were good at sailing, but almost all of them were natural-born businessmen who would not get up early without making a profit. Many Majins in Iron Sand City had been cheated by Rex, so all the Majins knew that they had to be very careful when talking to them. What happened in the festive harbor further proved this saying. Simbadi did not believe a single word of Rex's. Are you done? I have something else to do. You can find someone else to prove your innocence. Simbadi winked at Molly, signaling her to go with him. Wait! Rex shouted hurriedly. It's not free. I'm willing to pay you with a golden dragon, no matter what you get in the end. Simbadi just let him finish. Moody also grabbed Simbadi's hand. I think the things he made are very interesting. He's not like an ordinary liar. Feeling the warmth from Moody's palm, Simbadi's heart skipped a beat. But 10 golden dragon. As long as you tell me the specific location, I'll give you 10 golden dragon. Rex probably wanted to prove that he was not lying. He took out a golden dragon and put it in front of Simbadi. This is the deposit. If you can help me to the end, I'm willing to pay you 20 more. What do you think? Simbadi was a little surprised. It was rare for a fjord person to pay before seeing the goods, let alone 30 golden dragon. After a quick calculation, He realized that it was a huge sum of money. If he only relied on his salary, he would not be able to save that much money in 10 years. I also want to buy some new clothes for the children in my clan, Molly said, blinking her big watery eyes. Simbadi was finally defeated by Rex's double attack. Okay, I see. If you dare to lie to us, then you won't lose anything. Rex flicked the golden dragon to Simbadi. You can get a golden dragon just by saying a few words. There's no better deal than this. Sure enough, Fjord's people were good at bewitching people. Simbadi caught the gold coin and asked, "What do you want to know from me? Why is Muriel with you? What do you mean by writing the name? You have to start from the beginning." Rex cleared his throat. Let's talk as we go. First of all, what's your impression of the sea? Impression? He hesitated for a moment. The mother of the three gods, the birthplace of all things, and temperamental. I think it's mysterious, Molly said excitedly. No one knows how wide it is or how deep it is. Even many areas in the southernmost region have not been explored yet. If it's the sea, I'm afraid it can't be explored in 1,000 years. You're both right. But for Fjord's people, it's more like a treasure house, Rex said with a smile. Countless treasures are placed quietly on the seabed. There are boxes of gold dragons and silver royals, as well as lost ancient relics. They are not hidden at all, and they are just waiting for people to pick them up. It's not surprising that they can get rich overnight. That's why it's said that whoever owns this treasury will become the richest person in the world. That's easy to say, Simbadi said disdainfully. Unobstructed? The sea itself is the biggest barrier. You're not a fish. How can you go to the bottom of the sea at will? Yes, that's the problem, Rex said excitedly. The purpose of the Society of Wondrous Crafts is to make the impossible possible. This time, I want to prove to everyone that the Society of Wondrous Crafts is not a crazy organization, nor a guild of cowards. Although we're not explorers, we're no less useful than them. No, we're even more useful than them. I don't quite understand what you're saying. A great invention, the Fjord's man said eagerly. I call it the diving suit. With it, people can stay at the bottom of the sea for a long time like fish. What? Simbadi asked in surprise. When I was picking up shells, I did see them stay underwater for a long time, far longer than an average person can hold their breath, Molly added. That's why I asked them what they were doing. So it was Molly who approached them first. Simbadi's heart ached. I was also surprised at that time. After all, it's said that Sand Nation people always keep a respectful distance from the sea, Rex said. These days I've been carrying out diving experiments and the results are very successful. There's no doubt that it'll change the whole fishing world. It'll turn a job that only depends on luck into a new adventure that everyone can participate in. Since you've succeeded, why did you come to me? Simbadi asked in puzzlement. Ahem. Here's the thing, Mr. Simbadi. The only thing that the diving suit lacks is fame. This time, King Wimbledon's reward is the best opportunity, so I need to fish out some real treasures before others do. The kind that can attract the attention of the King of Grey Castle, Rex said, clenching his fists. Rex clenched his fists and said, Once I get the honorary title from His Majesty, there will definitely be countless people lining up to buy my invention. The Fjord's man paused for a moment. But we don't know where the treasure is most likely to be hidden. His Majesty didn't specify what he wanted in the recruitment notice. He only said that anything that looked strange would be fine. Obviously, there weren't many treasures that could interest His Majesty, and he definitely wouldn't be interested in the junk that we dug out from the sandpits and corals. Therefore, we couldn't come up with a good idea and could only search along the coastline. Just then Miss Molly brought us a ray of hope. She said that you once saw a strange water hole, and on a moonless night, you could even see a trace of light shining from the bottom of the water. I want to know where it is. In other words, the chief is the main reason that attracted these Fjord's people here, Simbadi thought with a headache. I've seen it by chance. It's at the bottom of a cliff, and the entrance can only be vaguely seen when the tide is low. But even so, it's dozens of feet deep from the sea, and no one knows how deep it is or what's in it. Maybe it's just an ordinary cave, and the light comes from a group of jellyfish. Don't worry. Even if we don't find anything, I'll pay you according to our agreement, Rex replied. As they spoke, the three of them arrived at an uninhabited beach outside the harbor. However, at this moment, the beach was surrounded by a group of people. These are the sailors I recruited. They have nothing to do with the experiment and mainly do odd jobs, Rex said. There are only two people who really help me, Eye Patch and Tall Hat. They're both my assistants and members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts. What a strange name. Simbadi thought as he glanced at the man and the woman in the middle of the crowd. His eyes finally fell on a strange suit in front of them. It had a huge metal helmet, which looked very incongruous with its body. Its clothes and pants seemed to be fused together, which made it difficult to wear. The most eye-catching thing was the two tubes sticking out of the helmet. They looked like the erect tentacles on the head of a shrimp, but were extremely long. The terminals of the tubes were connected to a large black machine. Simbadi had seen the same thing on a ship in Neverwinter. The sailors called it a steam engine. That's what you said. Chapter 11:26. 3 days later. Simbadi rose slowly from the sea in a hanging basket. How do you feel? As soon as Simbadi took off his heavy helmet, Molly came up to him excitedly. Is the underwater world interesting? It was not much better than the desert. Although there were many strange animals and plants, it was better to have nothing at all. Every time he sank into the sea, he felt like he was being swallowed by the pressure. The omnipresent pressure made it difficult for him to move and even breathe. Simbadi thought so, but when he saw Molly's expectant eyes, he swallowed his words and said, "How should I put it? The scenery is beautiful." That's great. If only I could go down and have a look, Molly sighed. Looking into her big light brown eyes, Simbadi suddenly remembered that a year and a half ago, when his clansmen set out from the port of Clearwater to the southern end of the desert, she had the same look on her face when she was on the stone boat. In such an unfamiliar environment, she could still spare some energy to comfort him, which made her look like a freak among the panic-stricken crowd. Simbadi did not know why, but he felt a little uneasy. Well done, your performance really surprised me. Rex was the next one to be hoisted out of the water. He clapped his hands and walked down from the basket. Balance, air intake, calmness, sense of direction. All the qualities required for diving are so outstanding. Is this the innate talent of the Sand Nation? Or is this what you're good at? I don't mean to offend you, but when I was chatting with Miss Molly, she mentioned that you're not a strong warrior in your clan. Molly stuck her tongue out at Simbadi and turned to chat with her assistant. There's a pool in the oasis where the Fishbone clan lives. When we were kids, we liked to compete to see who could dive deeper, so I'm not completely inexperienced. Simbadi said helplessly. But she's right. I'm not the best in the clan. If Carlone was here, he might be able to do it in one day. Carlone? Who's that? He's the strongest among the younger generation. Whether it's hunting or fighting, he's not inferior to his peers in the big clans. But he only participated in one dispatch team, so he should be working in the port of Clearwater now. It's too late to find him. Really? Rex shrugged. I don't think so. Not necessarily. What? He's better than you. The fjordsman took off his diving suit bit by bit. If you want to go deep into the sea, technique isn't the most important thing. The first thing you need is an open heart. An open heart? Simbadi was surprised. Accept the unknown and overcome yourself. This is the difference between a pond and the ocean. He looked in the direction of the festive harbor. Incredible changes are happening here. That Carlone you mentioned only came here once. He's far behind you in this regard. If I were to find him, I probably wouldn't be able to convince him to put on a diving suit and go into the water. Simbadi rolled his eyes at him. If Molly hadn't said she wanted to try it herself, I wouldn't have agreed. He had planned to lead them to the water cave, take the 10 gold royals, and then leave. As for this group of people, they could do whatever they wanted with them. However, he did not expect that Molly had already become so interested in the strange device. When she learned that they needed a helper for the salvage work, she raised her hand almost immediately. Simbadi had no choice but to agree to help the Society of Wondrous Crafts to the end, and follow Rex into the water cave. He did not trust Molly to take the risk before he confirmed the safety of the diving suit, let alone with a fjord's man. Although he knew she would have to go into the water one day, at least the risk would be much lower. Ha ha ha, Rex laughed carelessly. But you've finally crossed the boundary and taken a step into a new field, haven't you? Maybe that's why Molly likes to get along with you. Wait, what? What did you say? What? Haven't you noticed? He spread out his hands. When I was chatting with that girl, your name came up a lot. She said you were a timid kid and often cried when you were beaten, but you were very curious. However, you became more restrained and quiet after you grew up. Simbadi twitched the corner of his mouth and said, she really tells you everything. I guess it's easier for outsiders to talk about it, Rex said with a grin. I don't really understand the customs of the Sand Nation. Maybe personal strength is important, but maybe you've always underestimated yourself. You know nothing, Simbadi snorted in a low voice. Although he said so, he did not really resent Rex. In fact, even he found it incredible that he had become so familiar with a fjord's man in just a few days. At first, he had been reluctant to stay and help Rex because he did not want to see Molly alone. On second thought, Simbadi found that there was not a trace of disdain in Roland's words and actions. Roland was surprisingly easy to get along with. Compared with the arrogant nobles of the Northern Kingdom or the merchants of the fjords, this was very unusual. Probably because of this, Molly would visit the camp of the Society of Wondrous Crafts whenever she had time. After a moment of hesitation, he asked Rex this question. Why? Rex said after a moment's thought. There's no special reason. Because we've tasted enough discrimination and contempt. Tasted? Enough? Simbadi was stunned. Since Rex can promise 30 golden dragons in one go, he must have a high social status, right? But where does the contempt come from? Before Simbadi could ask further, an assistant came over and said, Sir, the equipment has been tested. We can dive at any time. How about it? Rex looked at him. Diving is no stranger to you, right? Simbadi had to suppress his doubts. As long as there's nothing wrong with the gadgets you made. Of course. I've been studying it for almost 10 years. In order to make sure nothing goes wrong, I've invested almost all my money in it. What? Ahem ahem ahem. No, nothing. Don't mind me. Rex turned his head away. In that case, I announce that we'll enter the water cave after noon and start our first exploration. The reason for choosing noon was simple. Since the air duct could meet the depth requirement, ensuring a good view was the top priority for diving. At this time, the sun was right above the cliff, almost shining directly into the sea. The seabed was more than 50 meters deep, not to mention the water cave halfway up the cliff. If they waited until the tide ebbed in the evening, it would be easy to get lost. I'll wait for you at the entrance. Rex put on his helmet and gave a thumbs up. Then he entered the basket and dived into the sea. About 15 minutes later, the assistant nodded to Simbadi and said, It's your turn. Simbadi took a deep breath and put on the heavy helmet. Molly stepped forward and fastened the helmet for him. Then she said loudly against the helmet, Come on, I'll wait for you here. He gave her a deep look and turned to walk to the basket. With the roar of the steam engine, Simbadi slid down bit by bit. The surging blue sea was getting closer and closer to him, gradually occupying his entire field of vision. For a moment, he had the illusion that he was not falling, but that the sea had taken the initiative to meet him and wanted to swallow him whole. A familiar sense of fear reappeared in his heart, but it only lasted for less than a breath's time before he recovered. Accept the unknown and overcome yourself. Besides Molly's sparkling eyes, Rex's words also appeared in his mind. Simbadi sighed and accepted the embrace of the sea. In an instant, the whole world turned into a clear blue. Sunlight sprinkled down from above like countless swimming golden snakes. After slowly descending for 20 meters, the basket stopped moving. Chapter 11:27. Rex, who had been waiting here for a long time, stretched out 2 fingers and pointed to the top of his head. and then to the depths of the cave. Simbadi gestured that he understood. Rex nodded, turned around and walked into the cave. Simbadi raised his head and stared at the air duct suspended above Rex's head. During the 3 days of walking underwater, he had not only familiarized himself with the basic operation of the diving suit, but also learned sign language and the details of diving. The most important thing was to keep an eye on the condition of the 2 air ducts, which was one of the reasons why 2 people were needed for the salvage operation. The other end of the tube was connected to an air pump driven by a steam engine, which pumped air in and out at the same time to maintain a smooth flow of air in the helmet. No matter which tube was damaged or blocked, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, they had to pay special attention when crossing complex terrain and changing directions. Seeing that there was no obstacle at the top of the cave that could threaten the air duct, Simbadi also jumped into the cave. The sound of the waves subsided, and he could clearly hear the hissing sound of the air duct and his own heartbeat. After about 10 meters, the light became dimmer and dimmer. Looking at Rex's blurry back, Simbadi felt that he was walking into an abyss. Just then, the ground under his feet suddenly rose and turned from a flat road to a gentle slope. In less than 7 minutes, Simbadi saw the surface of the sea again. It was no longer shining with golden light, but as quiet as the night. As Rex slowly emerged from the water, Simbadi held his breath. A huge cave appeared in front of them. Half of the cave's outline was hidden in the darkness, and only a small area of the dome was illuminated by the light from the sea, revealing a shimmering blue surface. This cave is actually a passage connecting the inside and outside. Simbadi struggled to climb ashore, and was about to take off his helmet when Rex stopped him. The fjordsman took out a waterproof oil lamp from his waist bag, lit the wick, and observed for a while before taking off his helmet. Phew! It seems that this is not a dead place. Is there wind? Simbadi felt a slight chill on his cheeks as he took off his helmet. Yes, there's probably another exit in the cave, Rex said excitedly. In this case, it's more likely that we'll find treasures here. We're really lucky. Simbadi was not interested in finding anything valuable. He was more concerned about the safety of the cave. Who would have thought that there would be a hollow terrain under the desert? This was beyond common sense. They could not have dived more than 20 meters deep. Even if there was a rock layer, it would not be too thick. How could the loose sand support such a large cave? Would the dome collapse? These questions made him feel slightly uneasy. I'd better report this discovery to Grey Castle when I get out of here, Simbadi thought. Although he felt sorry for the Society of Wondrous Crafts, they were not far from the festive harbor, and he did not want any accidents to happen. The wind seems to be coming from that direction. Rex placed his helmet by the pool, picked up the oil lamp and said, "Let's go take a look." Simbadi unsheathed his saber and followed them. However, as he explored deeper, he felt that the cave was getting stranger and stranger. It did not take long for the rocks under their feet to turn into soft soil. And then clusters of green grass replaced the slippery moss. It was as if they were not underground, but in the Silver Stream oasis. "I can't believe there are green plants here," Rex exclaimed. "I thought there were only mushrooms and moss in the dark underground." "How about we go back first?" Simbadi said hesitantly. "I feel that this place..." Halfway through his sentence he suddenly froze. "What's wrong with this place?" Rex looked back after a long silence. "Huh. What are you looking at?" "A flower." Simbadi felt his breath quicken. There was a beautiful little flower by his feet. Its petals were light purple and its leaves were as thin as a cicada's wings, as if they would break at the slightest touch. "This is the flower of gods. Is it very rare?" "No. It used to be everywhere," Simbadi said in a low voice. "I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but according to the legends about the 3 gods' emissaries, this flower can be found everywhere along the coast, like a purple ribbon. It's also the most gorgeous flower sea in the southernmost region." "There's a flower sea in the desert?" Rex asked in surprise. It said that a long time ago, this place was not a desert. Instead, it was covered with trees, grasslands, and rivers just like the north. He shook his head. But after the 3 gods' emissaries left, the earth gradually turned into sand and became what it is today. But that's not what I want to talk about. According to the legends, the flower of gods can't be moved once it takes root. That's why there's no flower sea in the oasis. It should have gone extinct a long time ago. I see, the fjord's man said, smacking his lips. The fjord's man smacked his lips. Perhaps it's because the desertification didn't affect the underground cavern, that the flower of god angels happened to be rooted here and survived. Is that true? Simbady's strange feeling grew stronger. For some reason, walking in this dim world, he felt like he was walking in an oasis. The purple flowers around him grew denser and denser, as if they did not grow in the ground by chance. Just when he was hesitating whether to move forward, he suddenly heard a light crack under his feet. Then a soft light bloomed from the soil, illuminating the area within a radius of several meters. What's going on? Rex asked in surprise. I seem to have stepped on something, Simbady said, swallowing hard. It looks like a plank. Is it a trap? He hurriedly bent down and brushed away the flowers and grass by his feet. This is ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Hearing the laughter echoing in the cave, Simbady felt goosebumps all over his body. What's so funny? Hey, tell me what it is first. Ha ha ha, it's a treasure. We've found a treasure. Rex said excitedly. Look. When he brushed away all the soil, Simbady was surprised to see that the light came from the thing under his feet. It was a stone tablet, half buried in the ground. There were countless lines on it, which were as dense as fingerprints. With his feet as the center, the light shot out in all directions, causing the tablet to look like white jade in contrast. Although it looked hard, it felt like rotten wood, which would sink a little with the slightest force. It was completely beyond the scope of common sense. What was more incredible was that once he moved his feet away, the surface of the tablet would gradually return to its original state, and the light would dissipate, as if everything he had just seen was an illusion. Is there a treasure more amazing than this? Rex said excitedly, stepping on the stone tablet. If I can offer this to the king of Grey Castle, I'll definitely be awarded the title of honorary explorer. But it's too big, Simbady said awkwardly. Judging from the small part that was exposed, the stone tablet was probably larger than both of them combined. It would not be easy to move it out of the water cave. As long as we use our brains, we'll definitely find a way. Or we can find another exit of the cave. Wait? Rex suddenly stopped and said, there seems to be another stone tablet over there. Simbady followed Rex's gaze and took a few steps forward. Sure enough, he stepped on the same stone tablet. With the help of its light, more grayish-white outlines appeared in the sea of flowers. There's one here and one there. Simbady and Rex walked along the stone tablets for dozens of meters. At first, they counted the number of stone tablets, but they soon gave up the idea. Over a short distance, the flower of gods was covered by more and more stone tablets. No matter where they stepped, there would be light, until a huge wall appeared in front of them. Oh my God! Rex gasped. Simbady also felt a chill. He slowly raised his head. In the soft light, he could see the outline of the stone wall. They found that it was not a wall, but a hill made up of countless stone tablets. Some of them were incomplete, some were broken, but most of them were shaped like a square cuboid. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were stone tablets. However, when they were piled up in a disorderly manner, Simbady had a different feeling. Chapter 11:28. I think we should go, Simbady murmured after a long silence. The longer they stayed in this place, the more oppressive they felt. Even when they were at the bottom of the sea, they had never felt so uncomfortable. The soft light under their feet and the oil lamp in their hands could only illuminate an area of about 10 steps around them. Beyond that, it was pitch black. In Simbady's eyes, the dim light did not bring him any comfort. Instead, it was an omen of danger. It meant that they were completely exposed in the open, but they knew nothing about the threats in the dark. In fact, until now, neither of them had seen the real edge of this cave. Go. Rex's voice trembled slightly. What are you talking about? I swear, this is definitely a wonder that even Lord Thunder has never seen. An ancient relic? No. It's a relic. The relic won't move. You can come back later, Simbadi said, racking his brains. Your assistant and the Society of Wondrous Crafts are all waiting for your good news. Hearing the mention of the Society of Wondrous Crafts, Rex immediately calmed down. You're right. I should bring the good news back first and share it with everyone. Then let's go. Wait. It's not easy to get here. We can't go back empty-handed. He took out a dagger from his waist bag and started to chisel a stone tablet. Don't worry. It won't take long. You put something in your pocket too. At least it can prove that we've found something. Simbadi had no choice but to do as he was told. After all, Rex was his employer. Since he had accepted the job of paying 20 golden dragon, he naturally had to bear the corresponding risks. Maybe this place just looks weird, Simbadi comforted himself. It's a little dark, but maybe there's nothing here. Clang, clang, clang. Every time Rex swung his dagger, there was a buzzing sound like metal and stone colliding, which was particularly ear-piercing in the silent cave. Simbadi also noticed that every time the dagger cut into the tablet, the point of contact would emit a much brighter light, even to the point of dazzling. He shook his head and pulled his attention back. At this time, Simbadi was not in the mood to cut the stone tablets. There were some odd stone tools scattered in the messy wall. They were probably tools left by movers who had decayed over time. He casually picked a few pieces and stuffed them into his waist pouch. This way, he could be considered to have completed the task given to him by the other party. Rub, rub, rub. The Swordsman was still focused on chiseling the tablet, and there were already 5 or 6 pieces of gravel the size of a fingernail in his hand. Hey, that's enough. Simbadi was about to urge him again when he suddenly heard an incongruous voice. It was the same grinding sound, but it was more fragmented, as if there were several Rexes chiseling a monument. Was this an echo? No. He realized that their positions hadn't changed at all. How was it possible that there was no sound before, but now there was an echo? Rex. It's almost done. This is the last piece. Stop. Give me another quarter of an hour. Stop. Simbadi almost roared. Rex was stunned. His dagger froze in the air, and the ear-piercing sound of collision stopped abruptly. But the fragmented sound was still there, and it seemed to be approaching them. This time, Rex also realized that something was wrong. As he stuffed the stone into his pocket, he looked around and asked, "What is that?" While he was asking, a white light suddenly appeared in the distance. Under the light, Simbadi saw what it was, a fully grown desert scorpion. Its pincers were as big as an arm, and its upturned tail was almost waist-high. The green tip of the needle was undoubtedly filled with venom. Without an antidote, one could only survive for a quarter of an hour at most. Damn it, the sound of the chisel must have startled it. He braced himself and put his saber in front of his chest. Step back slowly, and don't take your eyes off the scorpion. For an outstanding Majin warrior, a desert scorpion was not difficult to deal with. They were not intelligent and fast, and their poisonous stinger was not only their most threatening means of attack, but also their weakness. As long as the scorpion missed its target, its sharp saber could easily cut its stinger in half. The problem was that he was not an outstanding warrior in any way. Although he had received relevant training since childhood, he had neither participated in a joint hunting mission, nor had he fought a desert scorpion. He had to give it a try. When Rex completely disappeared behind him, Simbadi said softly, "Now look down. No matter what happens, don't move." I got it." After getting the answer, Simbadi also turned sideways. As soon as their eyes met, the desert scorpion launched an attack. Although Simbadi could not see it, he could hear the rapid sound of the scorpion rushing toward him. This was the desert scorpion's habit. It liked to look for opportunities during a confrontation. Once it found that its prey was distracted, it would immediately attack. Calm down. Simbadi slightly bent down, put his saber on his left side, and put his right hand on the hilt. This was the Sand Nation's starting gesture. It seemed that he was not facing the enemy, but the entire right side of his body was within the range of the saber. When he heard the desert scorpion crawling, he suddenly took a step to the side and drew his saber. A dim light flashed. Before he looked back, he felt a slight resistance in his hand. It was the feeling of the blade cutting through a hollow reed. With a crisp sound, the desert scorpion's stinger was cut in half. Simbadi turned his saber and stabbed it directly into the gap in the carapace behind the scorpion's head. The scorpion wobbled weakly on its hind legs and soon fell to the ground. Impressive, Rex said with relief. You're indeed a Majin warrior who lives by hunting. It's not over yet, Simbadi interrupted. The sound just now didn't sound like a desert scorpion's. Where was it? Where would the enemy come from? He looked around vigilantly. This place was full of stone tablets. No matter which direction he came from, there should be light. But there was only darkness around him. Except for the top of his head. Damn it! Simbadi suddenly realized his oversight. A soft light in the dark was more striking than anything else, but it was easy to ignore the new light in the already illuminated area. When Simbadi looked up, a black shadow had already pounced on him. The target was the fjord's man behind him. In a hurry, the only thing he could do was to turn around and kick Rex away. The desert scorpion almost brushed past Rex and landed on the ground. Simbadi's instinct, which had been honed by years of training, cut the scorpion's head in half without looking at it. Phew! He let out a long sigh. Fortunately, I made it in time. Hey, are you okay? Ahem. I'm probably. However, before Rex could finish his words, more sounds came from behind the wall. At first, they could still hear the sounds, but after a few seconds, the sounds became as dense as waves. At the same time, there was a muffled roar, as if something huge was crawling toward them. Rex and Rex looked at each other, and their faces turned pale. Run! Run! Simbadi grabbed Rex, who was still in a daze, and ran toward the entrance of the cave. A moment later, a dazzling light burst out from behind them, illuminating the entire cave. In the increasingly bright light, Simbadi saw a desert scorpion of astonishing size. Its eyes were as big as dinner plates, and its carapace was as thick as a reef. These features undoubtedly indicated the identity of the newcomer. It was one of the offerings of the three gods, the giant armored scorpion that ruled the earth. Under the pressure of its huge body, the wall made of stone tablets became so bright that it was difficult to open one's eyes. So that's why. Simbadi finally understood why green grass could grow everywhere in the cave, even though there was no light. He also understood why there was occasional light in the cave at night. Chapter 1129. Phew phew phew. Finally, here we are. Simbadi felt his body relax when he saw the small pool in front of them again. Thank the three gods, thank the Son of Earth and Mother Sea, he murmured in his heart. At this moment, the cave was bright, which allowed them to escape as fast as they could. The closer they got to the sea, the more the cave shrank, like the mouth of a croc. This was probably why the giant armored scorpions did not chase after them. However, this did not mean that they were completely safe. Simbadi did not forget the tide-like sound. He would not be surprised even if all the desert scorpions in the entire endless cape were here. Simbadi only knew that these predators could cross the stone wall at any time, follow the smell, and tear them into pieces. Fortunately, scorpions could not swim. As long as they escaped into the sea, they would be safe. Quick, put on your helmet. Simbadi grabbed the diving helmet on the ground and hurriedly put it on. However, he found that the fjord's man did not move. Hey, what are you waiting for? You. Go first, Rex said in a low voice with his back facing him. Go first. Simbadi was stunned. Damn it, is this guy still thinking about those glowing relics? Anger welled up in his heart. He strode forward and grabbed the man's shoulder. Are you crazy? Do you know what's going on? Simbadi's words got stuck in his throat. He looked at Rex's chest in astonishment, only to see that the soft leather and intestinal membrane had been cut open, and there was blood on both sides of the cut. Your diving suit. It's broken. Rex forced a smile that was uglier than a crying face. The desert scorpion didn't stab me, but its pincers scratched my suit. The Sand Nation man fell silent. The wound on Rex's chest was not big, just a cut. However, the damage to his diving suit meant that seawater would pour into his helmet along his neck. After a while, Simbadi said, If we only used the air pipe. Rex shook his head with a wry smile. Unless we're very close to the water, you'll have to inhale as hard as the air pump. The two pipes had to be connected to each other to maintain balance. This was something that the other party had told him long ago. That was why she had been so hesitant when answering his question. Perhaps the people of the fjords had already realized their predicament at that time. Thunder untied his waist bag and handed it to him. This is the sample of the stone tablet. Please give it to my assistant. Tell him that I have found something as good as Lord Thunder. Simbadi noticed that his fingers were trembling. Does your assistant have a spare diving suit? Only these two. From the selection of materials to the stitching, it will take at least half a year to make a set of clothes. Rex took a deep breath. It was obvious that he was trying his best to control his emotions. I know what you're thinking. In fact, I've thought of all the possible ways to get out of the cave without a diving suit. Perhaps this is fate. Fate. The people of the Society of Wondrous Crafts can never be real explorers. He bit his lip. You'd better leave before the scorpion comes. As long as you can bring the news back. Even if I can't be called an explorer, my name will definitely be known throughout the fjords along with this invention. Simbadi tilted his head and looked at the pool. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, I refuse. Huh. Rex widened his eyes in disbelief. You still owe me 29 golden dragon. If you die, who am I going to ask for it? Simbadi said grumpily. Only you, me, and Molly know about this agreement. I don't think your assistant will pay for it. I can tell from their clothes that they are no better than the Sand Nation people. We just don't have money now. Rex protested. To buy a steam engine from Grey Castle. We spent a little more than we expected. When the diving suit becomes famous, a lot of chambers of commerce will come to buy it. By then, we won't have to worry about money at all. But the problem is, the money has nothing to do with me, and probably won't even have anything to do with you. Simbadi threw his waist bag and helmet on the ground. If you become scorpion feces, do you think people will still insist that you invented the diving suit? As long as you change your story a little, you can gain both fame and fortune. There's nothing more worthwhile than this. So not only will I lose my 29 golden dragon, but your wish will also probably not come true. What do you want to do? Accept the unknown and overcome yourself. Simbadi repeated the words in his mind and let out a long sigh. Majins don't like to be owed, nor do they like to break their promises. An agreement is an agreement, no matter whether the other party is the king of Grey Castle or the fjord's people. I promised to help you to the end, right? Rex was stunned. But how are you going to? Look at the pool. He took off his waterproof suit. Don't you see that it's getting smaller? Only then did Rex notice that there was a circle of wet bluestones around the pool, which indicated that the water level was falling. The tide of the swirling sea is low, which means that the distance we need to wade through the water is getting shorter, Simbadi said word by word. If everything goes well, we'll be rescued as long as we swim 10 meters above the water. It's impossible to do that in the diving suit, but you might have a chance if you take off all your clothes, including the stones you've collected. Now take off your clothes. Take off my clothes? That's right. If we want to survive until the tide is as low as possible, we have to be prepared to stop the desert scorpions, and the most effective way is to set a fire. Simbadi nodded. But it's too steamy here, so flowers and plants can't be easily ignited. So we need some kindling. He pointed to the oil lamp. Grease and leather should be able to keep the fire burning for a while. Rex was silent for a long time. Don't try. It's impossible. Why? You can't tell when the tide will recede. For every meter the sea level rises, the distance through the water hole will be several times longer. If we act rashly, we'll only use up all the air in the long water hole. Rex said with a pained expression. Most importantly, I can't swim. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I'm from the fjords. Even seasickness is better than this. Because I can't swim, I can't throw myself into the sea like other people and become a real explorer. I already knew that when I was diving, Simbadi said calmly. What? You rely on the basket to get up and down, and you're very clumsy. Without this suit, I'm afraid you can't even get into the water. Since you know that, why do you still want to swim? Because you don't need to swim. You just need to hold your breath. It might be a little painful, and you might even lose consciousness. But as long as you don't move, I can get you out, Simbadi said slowly. Just by yourself? Rex asked incredulously. I've told you that there was a deep pool in the oasis I grew up in. Everyone liked to compete to see who could dive deeper and longer, Simbadi said, raising his head. I've never been the best in my tribe. But it's not because I've tried my best, but because I'm afraid. You're afraid? Yes, it's as deep as a giant mouth. I feel like I'll be sucked in if I dive any deeper. So I always hold my breath and pretend to be exhausted in front of everyone. Over time, even I believe it myself, Simbadi said, looking straight into Rex's eyes. He looked straight at Rex. You said that I've been underestimating myself. Maybe it's true. So I want to try and see what my limits are. Similarly, you can't leave if you can't swim? Are you sure that's your limit? Simbadi said loudly. You really haven't underestimated yourself. Rex unconsciously clenched his fists. At least you're not afraid of the sea at all. In this respect, you're much better than me, Simbadi said with a smile. How about it? Do you want to have a bet with me? You're an explorer. How can you be a real explorer without taking some risks? 2 hours later, the entire cave was filled with choking smoke. The pool gradually receded into the cave, which was just enough for the two of them to hide in. The faint sound of desert scorpions crawling came from the other side of the smoke. It was like a sweeping wave. The two of them looked at each other and knew that this was the last moment. Let's go, Mr. Honorary Explorer. Simbadi took a deep breath and dove into the water with Rex. The cool seawater melted into his body. It was as if he had returned to his childhood. But this time, there was no Carlone or other tribesmen by his side. Chapter 1130. 5 days later, Rex met Simbadi again. In the medical center of the First Army. With him came the vivacious Majin girl. How do you feel? Muley asked, putting a bunch of seaweed on the windowsill. I couldn't find any beautiful flowers here, so I had to use this instead. But at least it's green. It's better than yellow sand, isn't it? Ah, thank you, Rex said, sitting up hurriedly. I feel much better than before. That's good. You looked terrible when you were fished out of the water. Your face was blue, your body was twitching, and you kept vomiting seawater, Muley said with a smile. After you were sent to the camp, you had a high fever. Simbadi and I came here twice, but it seemed that you hadn't fully regained consciousness. Rex smiled bitterly. My body was indeed too weak. But you made it to the end and surpassed your limits, Simbadi said with a grin. Mr. Explorer, your desire to survive was stronger than I thought. In fact, your desire to live was stronger than I thought. When we were about to reach the surface, I almost exhausted all my strength. If you didn't hold on to me tightly, I'm afraid it would have been difficult for me to bring you out. He lifted up a corner of his shirt. Here, there are still a few bruises. Sorry, Rex said, a little embarrassed. I don't remember what happened after we got out of the cave. You must have been thinking about something at that time. That's why you didn't let go of me even though you were unconscious, right? Muley asked. Maybe. Rex nodded. Many things came to my mind before I passed out, such as my precious invention, the Society of Wondrous Crafts, and my 2 wives who were waiting for me. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. After a long while, Simbadi asked tentatively, What did you say just now? 2 wives. Rex seemed to have suddenly understood. Ah, I forgot to tell you that the customs of the fjords are different. The island I live on doesn't have a limit on the number of couples. It's all voluntary. It's normal that you don't know this. I suddenly think. Leaving you in the cave might have been a good choice, Simbadi said, twitching the corner of his mouth. I agree. Muley agreed with a serious expression. Hey, you don't have to be so heartless. Rex saw that the situation was not good, and quickly changed the topic. That relic, how is it now? Simbadi immediately became serious when it came to business. The First Army has designated that area as a restricted area. No one is allowed to enter without permission. They've also set up sentry posts around the cliff, probably to guard against the giant armored scorpions. I was entrusted by them to sneak into the water cave again during the low tide period and found the pouch. His voice became lower and lower. But these things were handed over to the First Army. I'm sorry. No, you didn't do anything wrong. Rex shook his head gently after listening to the other party's explanation. Since the First Army has taken over the treatment, it's impossible for you to hide it from them. Besides, I don't think I can monopolize such a large relic. The only pity was that the 2 diving suits were destroyed. Even if the news of the success of the experiment was released, the credibility would be greatly reduced. But it can't be helped. After all, you did it to save me. Simbadi was speechless. He knew how much effort Rex had put into this project. It took him half a year to make a waterproof suit, and that was only the last 2 finished products. Rex had failed many times and wasted many materials and Golden Dragon, which could be seen from Rex's lack of funds. It was a heavy blow indeed. After a long silence, he asked in a low voice, "What are you going to do in the future?" "Go back to the fjords first, and then make a comeback," Rex answered without hesitation. Simbadi and Muley were stunned. "Why? Are you worried that I won't be able to recover from this setback?" Looking at the surprised expressions on their faces, Rex smiled. "If I didn't have this escape experience, I probably would have given up on this project." He stretched out his hand, clenched it, and then opened it again, as if he was feeling something. "But now I understand that this is not my limit. So what if I can make a waterproof suit every 6 months? It's much better than before. At least I know it will succeed." "Rex, don't worry. In 2 years at most, I'll come back with a new diving suit," the fjords man said word by word. "When that time comes, please continue to work with me," Simbadi thought to himself. "It seems that my worries are unnecessary." Just as he was about to agree, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a man dressed like an officer walked in. "Rex? Simbadi?" He looked at the 2. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" Simbadi hurriedly bowed. "About your discovery, Neverwinter has given us the latest instructions." The officer nodded. "His Majesty wants to see you." "You mean the King of Grey Castle?" Great Chief?" the 2 exclaimed almost at the same time. They both saw the incredulity in each other's eyes. It was beyond their imagination that the news could travel back and forth between the festive harbor and the new King's city of Greycastle in just 5 days. Generally speaking, if a superior wanted to ask for information, he could just send someone to ask for it. Since the king was taking this matter so seriously, did it mean that the discovery of the ruins was of extraordinary significance? "Yes, and His Majesty has sent a ship to pick you up. You'll arrive at the festive harbor in about 2 days, the officer said with a smile. "Until then, you can stay in the barracks and have a good rest." In Neverwinter, Grey Castle, Roland sat at his desk, reading the report sent back from the front line. In every aspect, the torch plan was progressing smoothly. In May, the demons did not put up any resistance, and the railway line was steadily advancing toward Tequila. At this rate, the First Army would attack the ruins of the Holy City by the middle of June, which was 10 days earlier than the original schedule. Although the attack was progressing smoothly, Roland did not feel relaxed. The demons were the mortal enemy of human civilization. In the past 2 battles of divine will, the demons had won overwhelming victories and forced human beings to a corner of the land of dawn. Now the fertile plains was the last barrier. As long as the obelisk was erected, the red mist would cover the entire continent, and the demons should be determined to take it. Roland kept glancing between the reports and the map, hoping to find some clues, but to no avail. After the night attack, the defense of the railway station had become more complete, and the only way to destroy the encampment was to take it by force. Although it was the most likely place for a war to break out, it was also the battlefield where the First Army had the greatest advantage. If the demons chose to fight head-on, it would be a good thing. The railway line, which was hundreds of kilometers away, was the second target. In fact, it was also the place where the demons had exchanged fire, with a total of 46 incidents so far. Had it not been for these reports, he would have thought that the demons had already withdrawn from the fertile plains, and only the Ministry of Construction was left to repair the railway. However, it was not easy to cut off the logistics under the protection of the armored trains, machine guns, and the witches. In other words, the Torch Project had been designed to deal with this problem from the very beginning. After the third Black River train was put into service, the reports of Devil Beast's harassment became less frequent. The last place that could be attacked, the forest station, was also the least important. As long as Leaf did not take the initiative to fight the demons, they would not be able to do much. After all, the forest station was too far from the tequila's supply line, and a small group of demons could not pose a threat to the station's fortifications. Moreover, the area around the terminal station had already been burned once, so it would be difficult for the demons to do the same thing again. As the front line continued to advance, Lightning was able to directly investigate the situation in the Tequila ruins. So far, there were no signs of the demons sending more troops. Looking from the sky, even the red line behind them, which was used for supply, had become much dimmer. Chapter 1131. Roland put down the report and thought of the information revealed by Caberdabi. Enemies from the Skysea realm. Is it because the demons are under too much pressure that they can't deal with the war on the fertile plains? The general staff was more inclined to believe this. After all, no matter what tricks the demons had up their sleeves, the decisive factor of the war was their strength. Although the Magic Slayer had surprised Leaf by traveling thousands of miles to the terminus of the forest, he had also exposed his ability and whereabouts. Even though he was beyond the detection range of the magic eye, Sylvie could still sense his magic power. Now that the flashing red star was stationed in the ruins, Sylvie would be able to sense it immediately if anything happened. To put it simply, the demons who had invaded Tequila had used up all their trump cards, and Neverwinter was still adding new ones. With sufficient money and food, the administrative office began a new round of army expansion. This time, the scope of recruitment was extended to the whole country. After the administrative unification of Grey Castle, its mobilization ability had improved significantly. According to Barov's preliminary estimation, the number of soldiers offered by the various regions was likely to exceed 5,000, which was equivalent to the total number of the First Army 2 years ago. Among them, the northern region, which was managed by Carwin Kant, was the most active one. When the officials trained by the second-level city hall matured and gained full control of the territory, the number of recruits would undoubtedly increase several times. In terms of weapons, the work of replacing revolving rifles with bolt rifles was being carried out in an orderly manner. Thanks to the rapid growth of skilled workers and the improvement of craftsmanship, the large-scale replacement of the rifles was almost the same as the weapons used by the precision shooters, except for the lack of scopes. Although revolving rifles had a high firing rate, their structure meant that they had low initial speed, short range, and poor accuracy. They were more than enough to deal with the Noble Knight, but they were not good enough to deal with the Mad Demons, whose throwing distance was between 100 and 200 meters. Bolt rifles could effectively make up for this shortcoming and help the soldiers win the advantage of distance. The anti-demon grenade developed for senior demons and spider demons had also been finalized and was in the phase of mass production. This kind of simple structure and cheap materials did not have any technical obstacles. In a sense, it was even simpler than making bullets. According to the current production rate, it could completely make it in time for the decisive battle in a month. Although the First Army lacked relevant training, the ease of operation was a major feature of the grenade, which was fundamentally different from the artillery. Historically, this kind of weapon was also directly used in actual combat, receiving training and testing on the battlefield, so Roland was not worried about this aspect. On the other hand, the demons in Tequila had not changed much. Based on the amount of the red line, Agatha and Phyllis estimated that the number of demons was between 3,000 and 5,000, which might have been a great battle for the Union 400 years ago. However, for the first army, these demons were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Due to the iron rule that the enemy needed the red mist to sustain their lives, it was difficult for them to conceal or deceive the enemy in terms of raw power. This was also the most important basis for the general staff to make a judgment. To be honest, Roland also felt that the general staff's judgment was credible. Battlefield inference was evidence, and there was no difference between thinking that the enemy was too weak or too strong. The only thing he could do was not to blindly command and let more professional people take charge of the front line. Maybe I'm not a commander, so I'm worried, Roland thought in a self-mocking manner. Since I can't see anything wrong, I might as well stop guessing. When the day of the decisive battle comes, everything will be revealed. Roland heaved a long sigh of relief. When he was about to rub his swollen forehead, a pair of hands pressed on his temples with just the right amount of force. He immediately felt much more relaxed. There was no need for words or thanks. This was the tacit understanding they had developed over the past 4 years, and it was also the proof that he was not fighting alone. In the past, he had always imagined that one day he could become a decadent ruling class and enjoy himself all day long. However, when he really reached this stage, his busy hours only increased, far exceeding the scope of 8 hours, and even sleeping became a kind of work. It was not that he had never complained, but he rarely stopped. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons. Of course, he was moving forward to achieve his goal. But it was also the common expectation of many people. After closing his eyes to enjoy the moment, Roland looked at another report on the table. It was about the discovery of the giant armored scorpion and the mysterious ruins. Although it had not been further confirmed, the strange relics attached to the letter were very credible. This report had aroused his great interest. According to the murals in the temple, it was not surprising that there might be traces of the ancient civilization in the Endless Cape. What surprised him was that there was such an amazing discovery so soon. The stone wall in the underwater cave reminded him of the mural, where the corpses of the stickmen were piled up like a mountain. If it was a civilization from 1,000 years ago, it should have been reduced to dust. As the defeated, it was unlikely that anyone would erect a monument for them. So why were there so many steely-shaped objects? That was why he was particularly curious. All the samples obtained so far had been handed over to Celine for hazard testing. After all, their biggest enemy was the radiation race, and they could not afford to relax when it came to safety. In addition, the identity of the discoverer was also very interesting. He was not a traditional fjords merchant or explorer, but a member of the Society of Wondrous Crafts. He did not forget the pioneer who had died for flying as mentioned by Marjorie. Therefore, after receiving the news, Roland immediately ordered the garrison at the festive harbor to send the two to Neverwinter. He was really curious about this group of people. As for the giant armored scorpion, it was the least important part of the report. It was probably a hybrid demonic beast, which was why it was so huge. Since he had already won the position of chief through the holy duel, the sacrifice of the 3 gods was not important anymore. He could just leave it to the local First Army. Just then, he heard footsteps outside the door, and then the office door was pushed open with a squeak. Is the test result out? Give it to me. Roland raised his head, but the latter half of the sentence was stuck in his throat. He thought it was a guard who brought Celine's test report, but he did not expect it to be Tilly Wimbledon. Moreover, she slightly raised her eyebrows and looked a little unhappy. The next second, Roland realized why she was here. I have a few new bottles of chaos drinks here. Do you want to try them? Well, Your Majesty, we've already used this trick, Nightingale whispered in his ear. Chapter 1132. Looking at her questioning eyes, Roland thought that she was quite cute when she was blaming someone. She rarely called him brother when she was in a good mood. She would only call him brother in front of outsiders or when she was annoyed, which made people want to tease her. Ahem, no, now is not the time to think about this. He coughed lightly and pulled his thoughts back on track. The plane has not been finalized yet, so every part has to be made by Anna and Soroya. Now that the war at the front is imminent, you should know better than most people how much work they have to do. Although I've completed the blueprint a long time ago, I can't turn it into reality by myself. With the extension of the railway, the interval between the Seagull and the front line had changed from 1 or 2 days to 3 or 4 days. It was not that Tilly and Vendi wanted to slack off, but a large amount of war preparation work could not be completed in a day, so there was no other way but to extend the duration of the stay. As the transport, Tilly naturally knew how hard it was for everyone. Many witches fell asleep on the seats as soon as they boarded the plane. For this reason, the Seagull had even replaced the cushions and backrests with more comfortable ones. Moreover, defeating the demons and taking back the fertile plains was the most important goal at the moment. As soon as this was mentioned, her imposing manner suddenly decreased, and her body that was propped up on the desk shrank back. I also want to start the test flight early so that the air knight can be put to use. Don't worry, in fact, the plane's main body is basically completed, only some auxiliary parts have not been installed, so you just need to be patient. Wait, Tilly interrupted. The main body is completed, so it can fly without those parts, right? Roland only then realized that he had let the cat out of the bag. At this time, Princess Tilly was no longer the amateur who knew nothing about planes, so it was not easy to fool her. It's not that it can't, but it is, after all, fundamentally different from the Seagull. If there is a problem, Vendi can't help fix it, and if there is a mistake... At this point he gradually closed his mouth, because Tilly's sparkling eyes had explained everything. He really couldn't resist such a gaze. Nightingale chuckled softly behind him. Recently, she seemed to be very happy to see him at a loss for words. After staring at each other for a long time, Roland let out a long sigh. All right, I'll inform the people at the airport to get ready. That's more like it. Tilly's raised eyebrows finally lowered, and the corners of her mouth revealed an irrepressible joy. He picked up the phone. But remember, if there is an accident during the test flight, or if you lose control, you must abandon the plane immediately. Do you understand? Of course, because planes can be rebuilt, but pilots like me are precious. Tilly crossed her arms and said proudly. That's what you think, right? Neverwinter Airport. In the beginning, it was just a simple piece of concrete with nothing but 2 runways. But now it was a real flying training ground and the prototype of the Air Force Academy. In the enclosed flight test field, a shiny silver plane was pushed out from the hangar by workers and placed at the end of the runway. Tilly took a deep breath and said, That's specially made for me. Yes. Roland nodded. The Unicorn is powered by a 5-cylinder star-shaped piston engine. The main power is provided by a 5-cylinder star-shaped piston engine. In theory, the plane can reach a speed of more than 150 kilometers per hour. Even the fastest Devil Beast can't catch up with it. As the first human-made autonomous aircraft in this era, the Unicorn looked very different from the Seagull glider. The most obvious difference was its huge head. In order to fit the engine, the nose of the plane had to abandon its aerodynamic streamline appearance and be shaped like an iron barrel, which looked like it had been shaved flat. Second was the 2-blade propeller in front of the nose, which was also missing from the Seagull. Since it was the first practical piston engine, even with a lot of reference materials, the final product was quite conservative. Since the power output was not high, the 2-blade propeller could meet the requirements. Lastly was the fuselage. Because the Unicorn was essentially a fighter, it was less than 9 meters long, almost half the length of the Seagull. The fuselage also did not need to carry passengers, so it looked quite small. However, the interior of the fuselage was much more complicated. In addition to the control system, there were also fuel tanks, fuel pipes, and other power components. There was also space for a second seat and a firepower system. Unicorn. You can come up with some good names sometimes. Tilly hurried to the biplane and quickly noticed the abnormality in the cockpit. Were the missing auxiliary parts originally installed here? There were still 2 holes where the instrument panel should have been. Even though she had never seen the actual thing, she could guess that it was not completed yet. Yes. Roland nodded. These parts are mainly used to display speed and altitude, which are the 2 most important parameters in flight. In the past, Vendi controlled the plane's attitude, so we didn't need to know these. But if we want to fly with our own strength, We must always pay attention to the changes in these two parameters. Don't worry. I may not know how to build a plane, but when it comes to piloting, I'm definitely the best in Greycastle. She climbed onto the plane confidently and sat in the pilot's seat. In theory, the unicorn only had one more throttle valve than the seagull, and the rest of the control levers were in the same position. Before this, Tilly had practiced on the simulator many times, so there should not be any mistakes. However, this was, after all, a brand new plane. Its weight, agility, and speed were very different from the seagull. The mechanical system had not been fully tested, so it would not be surprising if there were any problems. This was also the reason why Roland was worried. If the plane crashed as soon as it took off, even if Tilly had extraordinary piloting skills, she might not feel anything. At first, he had wanted to build a few prototypes so that she could familiarize herself with the new body while crashing. But at this point, it was impossible for her to change her mind. "Your Majesty, everything is ready," the hangar supervisor reported. "Let's begin." Roland turned around and left the runway. Yes. As the order was given, 2 workers inserted a hand crank into the engine starter and started to turn it hard. "I'm testing the latest human weapon, but this scene is just like the hand-guided tractor when I was a child." Roland could not help but curse in his mind. When the time comes, he must get the battery and auxiliary motor out no matter what. Bang, bang, bang. When the piston gradually accelerated under the influence of external force, a worker closed the pressure relief valve, and the oil in the cylinder was instantly ignited. The engine erupted with a few loud explosions, and at the same time, black smoke rose. Very soon, the sounds of explosions became one, and finally turned into a deafening roar. Chapter 1133. Princess Tilly doesn't have the ability to fly, does she? Nightingale murmured. Yes. Although the stone of flight can make her fly, she can't carry such a heavy object, Roland said as he looked at the unicorn hovering overhead. What's wrong? I've heard you talk about it many times, and I've been by your side when you were drawing and testing the internal combustion engine. But when I see it with my own eyes, I still find it incredible. Humans can really fly like birds with the help of external forces, Nightingale said emotionally. It's just a combination of metal and wood. Indeed, it's just metal and wood, but it's our own bodies that combine them organically, Roland said with a smile. Our hands, magic power, and cognition. So it can't really be called an external force. Everyone can fly like her, right? Nightingale asked softly. Including me. Yes, everyone. Including you, Roland said affirmatively. Nightingale was no stranger to the sky. She had ridden on a hot air balloon before, and she had also ridden on Maggie's back. But compared to flying freely, those were obviously nothing. Even Nightingale, who had magic power, could do that, let alone ordinary people without any special abilities. Ever since people raised their heads to look at the sky, they had already been deeply immersed in the charm of roaming the sky, unable to extricate themselves. The pioneer of the Society of Wondrous Crafts was the best example. 30 minutes later, the unicorn landed steadily on the runway. How do you feel? Roland asked Tilly, who ran over excitedly. This plane is amazing. Her eyes lit up. It's so much more flexible than the seagull. To be honest. Although Vendi is good at controlling the wind, it's difficult for her to do what I want. But this is different. The speed, pitch, and deflection of the flight are all under my control. It can be said that the movements are born from the heart, just like the limbs of the hands and feet. Movement comes from the heart, shaped like hands and feet? Roland could not help but sweat in his heart. Although the unicorn had referred to a large number of mature biplane designs, it was still a crude prototype with testing elements. Controlling the rudder depended entirely on hand, and altitude and speed depended entirely on feeling. Being able to fly smoothly was already a huge improvement. If it were not for the fact that he knew the plane inside out, he would have thought that the other party was flying a modern fighter with a 4-speed fly-by-wire and computer-aided flight control. He was probably a big boss. So are you satisfied? He waved at the hangar supervisor. That's all for today. What are you talking about, brother? Tilly interrupted. How can 30 minutes be enough? Then why did you fall down? Just to let you know. You have a lot of work to do, don't you? She waved her hand. Go. You don't have to wait for me here. I still have many ways to fly that I want to try. Roland shook his head helplessly as he looked at the back of the other party excitedly leaving. The plane did not break down at the beginning, which was already good enough. According to Tilly's ability, she should be able to quickly familiarize herself with the new characteristics of the unicorn. Besides, she could get out of the plane at any time, so there was really no need for him to keep an eye on her. It seems that you've been abandoned. Nightingale gloated. You talk too much. Roland rolled his eyes. Let's go. Smiling, Nightingale grabbed him and disappeared into the mist. As soon as he returned to the castle hall, a guard came up to him. Your Majesty, the third border city sent a message saying that the mission you assigned to us has basically been completed. Oh, Roland raised his eyebrows. Where's the report? They said that they want you to go there in person. It seemed that what the two people found in the festive harbor could not be explained in a few words. He thought for a moment and said, I see. Let's go now. After entering the underground, Celine was already waiting for him in the main hall. Your Majesty, your speculation is correct. There are indeed materials to make the Rubik's Cube in the Endless Cape. She stretched out her auxiliary tentacle and showed the two samples to Roland. The grayish-yellow stone on the left is very similar to the Magic Ceremony Cube. Even if it's not exactly the same, it's not far off. If there are enough of them, I can start making replicas. Sufficient. How much is it? Let's try a few thousand first. Ugh. He really didn't stand on ceremony. Even if the samples weren't big, a few thousand yuan would be enough to cover the floor of a room. He thought to himself that it was imperative to excavate the Cape ruins, and the sooner the better. I'll send someone to collect it. What about the other one? The other is simply inconceivable. The first thing we can be sure of is that the light it emits does not harm the test animals at all. It seems to be just an ordinary light, and not the kind of light you are worried about. Radioactive particles. Exactly. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the radiation is so weak that it can't be detected by animals. But if that's the case, we don't have to worry about its harmfulness. Celine picked out a piece of stone tablet from the bottle on the right and put it in Roland's hand. I asked Miss Lucia to decompose a small piece of it and found that its composition is not much different from sand. Like sand? Roland was surprised. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? It just looks like a stone or a larger gravel, but it has a certain degree of flexibility and emits light when compressed. There's probably nothing weirder than this in the world. Well, he fiddled with the sample in his hand and thought for a long time before saying, You can't say that. Do you know what this thing is? No, I just thought of something else. Roland said slowly, since matter is a combination of elements, in addition to the elements themselves, the structure is also a major factor that affects its nature. We find it strange only because we don't know much about it. For example, the element carbon is called diamond in its tetrahedral structure, and has extremely high strength. Graphite, which has a hexagonal layered structure, is so brittle that it can be broken by hand. If you tear off a layer, it becomes graphene, which has excellent electrical conductivity. But if two layers of graphene are stacked together and rotated at a slight angle, it will undergo a completely different change. It will become an insulator. When it is lowered to a certain temperature and injected with electrons, it will transform into a superconductor. From beginning to end, only one element, carbon, is performing. This is the mystery of the material. In fact, even in the later generations, the exploration of the microscopic world had only uncovered a tiny corner of it. In this dark realm that had no theoretical guidance, what people did was no different from what they did 1,000 years ago. They rearranged, combined, and explored randomly. Even the most common elements could produce shocking phenomena when they were mixed together. Perhaps the luminous stone tablet and the various coatings of Soroya were not mysterious because of magic. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.